So every summer in my city, me and my friends like to make small campfires in chill, secluded areas because we don't want to drive an hour to an actual campsite and pay any campsite fee to do so. These also happen pretty spontaneously, so it's a nice last-minute hang just to do for us. There's this one spot near my house that's located by a river that's really nice because no one usually goes there. The only thing to be worried about are bears though, because living in the Pacific Northwest is challenging like that, and my house specifically is located right next to the mountains and the forest. Now, one particular night at 11 p.m, I decided to go ahead of my friends and meet them at the spot and set things up early because I want us to be chilling once they all get here. The spot that I get to has a 2-minute paved walkway I have to go through, and then I have to take a small trail ramping down the right side of the bridge that crosses over the river. Along this paved walkway are 2 lamps located at halfway and another at the start of the bridge or the ramp down to the campfire spot. So, I park my car at the beginning of the trail on the street and bring my campfire stuff, like flashlight, lighter, small firewood, small shovel to dig out the pit, etc. I get to the spot, and it's a small sandy beach kind of embankment on the side of the river, with a small wading area for toddlers with their families during the hot summers. I set up the chair, and I get to dig in the pit with only my flashlight illuminating where I'm digging. I'm also shoveling the sand right next to me, nowhere near the water. But all of a sudden I hear a loud splash. A splash so loud that it can only come from something equally large, like a 2-hand-sized rock or something. I'm confused because I swear that I'm not throwing my sand into the water, even though I'm only a few feet away, I guess. I shine my flashlight at the water, and I don't see anything. So I kind of just brush it off, thinking I'm just hearing things. But as I keep shoveling a bit more, I hear another loud splash. At this point, I think something is falling from above because logically something must be falling into the water. I point the flashlight above where some trees are above the river, and I don't see anything big enough to make that sort of splash. So as I keep digging, with my heart rate kind of going at this point, I hear a rustling past the arch where the bridge goes over the river. I quickly grab my light and shine it towards where I heard the rustling. I call out, "Hello?" There's no response. In my own head, it was a bear. I should be getting out of there immediately, but there was no bear or signs of anything for that matter. So I tell myself I must just be hearing things now because, I've seen horror movies before and my mind is playing tricks on me, right? But then I hear the noise again and it clearly sounds like leaves being rustled, so I shine my flashlight over to the area again, and as I focus my eyes towards the illuminated area, I then see the naked back of a man hunched over. I was kind of frozen in anxiety and stress because, honestly, of all the things I was to see, I didn't think that I'd see the naked back of some dude. From the quick analysis my brain could muster up, he looked to be in mid-40s, shaved, not bald, and medium-ish build, like a mix between chubby and built, I guess. But as I had my flashlight staying on his back, he started to stand up, and the first thing that I noticed was that he was not wearing any pants either. My next reflex was to start packing up all my stuff and getting the heck out of there because now I'm piecing in my head that he must have been throwing things into the water to scare or shoo me away. So after using my reflexive deductive skills, I proceeded to speed walk out of there with all of my stuff. I'm carrying all of my things with me and briskly walking up the ramp, and I'm now on the paved path out of the forest. I can feel my heart beating in my chest, and I'm frequently looking back to make sure that I'm not being followed. I am in Crocs, mind you, so I'm hoping that if I have to book it out of here, I'd regret not being in sport mode from the get-go. I make it to the halfway point though, and a sense of relief starts setting in, knowing that I made it safely out of this very scary situation. But as I check behind me for the final time, I see something. Slowly creeping over the ramp is the naked man crawling on all fours as if he was a primate walking. His head was positioned towards me, looking at me as he made his way to the middle of the paved walkway. He slowly then gets up from his stance and starts standing on his feet and positions his body to face me. After setting himself into this new position, the man then starts running towards me. Well, at that, I absolutely booked it. I ran as hard and as fast as I could down that path. My flashlight jumped out of my pocket at one point and I lost it, but I didn't care because, a whole naked man was chasing me at 11 p.m. at night in a secluded forest. I looked back for a split second, and the man was still running towards me, still completely naked. He could have my flashlight for all I cared at that moment. I wanted to make it out of this situation alive. I finally made it out of the forest, and I run to my car, which is only 30 feet away from the end of the forest. I desperately get to my car, and like a classic horror movie, I fumble with trying to get my key fob to unlock my car. And yes, I actually dropped my keys and quickly think to myself, I'm actually going to die. But I brush the thought off and pick them up. I finally get a hold of my fob properly, unlock my doors, and throw my things into the back seat before quickly getting into the driver's seat. This felt like an eternity, but in hindsight was most likely about 6 seconds altogether. As I try to guide my key into the ignition, I am fixated on the end of the paved path that I was just at a few seconds ago, waiting to see if the naked man was still coming. I feel my key to go into the ignition, and I switch my sights onto the road in front of me, and then I zoom out of the area as fast as I could. As I drive away, and I'm a good 30 seconds from the location of the horror that just took place, I get a call on my phone. It was my friends calling me asking if I'd made it to the spot yet, and all I say to them is, "Guys, do I have a crazy story to tell you?" They pull up to my house because, again, it was actually decently close to the campfire area, and I tell them the whole story the way that I told it just now. They swear that it was none of them trying to prank me or anything like that too, and I also knew none of them would try to full sprint at me with their dong out like that. But as we're just talking out in front of my house, there's a college student who looks like he was walking home that's going towards the direction of where I encountered the naked man. I just yelled out to him, "Hey, man, be careful, there's a naked guy that was chasing me by the bridge that crosses over the river there." He responds saying, "Oh really? I gotta go over the bridge to go home." All I tell him is, "Good luck, man." The next day, I reported it to the police by phone, but they sent over an officer so I could tell them in person and show them where the area that I saw these things was at. When we went to see where I initially saw the man's back hunched over, they said that they didn't see any trace of anyone being there previously. But the officer did say that they would make a note of it anyways, in case it ever happens again. Some friends say that it was a skinwalker. Others say, more realistically, that it's either a homeless, mentally ill, or drunk or high person. One theory I've heard my friends say is that it's a future version of me pulling a prank on past version of me because, honestly, if or when time travel is real, I would totally screw with my younger self like that. Anyway, that's my story, and it's something that will always stick with me. That feeling of running away like that in the dark is something that will never leave me. It is something that I often still talk about with all of my friends. So, I was on an ocean crossing from San Pedro, California, to Papeete, Tahiti, on a 60-foot sloop. We left in early July. It was 5,500 miles, and it was me, first mate, another crew, and a first-time captain. I was the head of night watchman along with the other crewmen. It was the night of day 12 as well, and we were like 1,000 plus nautical miles from any land, and there were no ships on the AIS for hundreds of miles. It was around 3 a.m, 2 hours before my shift was done, and we had a policy of only using red light in the cockpit at night to save our night vision in case we need to go forward and fix something. I was looking at the nav when I felt something watching me from the aft of the ship. There's not a lot of interaction with anything other than the crew out there, so you know when there's another presence almost. Happens a lot when there's whales or dolphins too. Hard to explain, but if you know, you know. Anyway, the ship had a swim step on the stern and a 2-ish foot tall transom until you got into the actual cockpit. I looked back at the stern, and crouching on the swim step, so only its forehead, eyes, and hands were visible, was a blackish grey thing. Whatever it was bald and looked shiny, and it was staring intently directly at me with beady eyes reflecting the red light due to the cockpit. I completely froze, and after meeting its gaze for a few moments, stared directly ahead at the nav. A moment later, I heard a splash which made me look back, and when I did, it was gone. The crewman with me didn't see it, and I didn't say anything about it for a couple of days. Then at dinner one evening, the captain told us of something that he had seen in the early hours of the morning ring that day. A dark, slender thing, treading water next to the ship, lazily bobbing there but never taking its eyes off of the captain. I then relayed my story to him and the crewman, and we just couldn't come up with an explanation. We didn't see anything else for the rest of the trip, but we all did get that sense that we were being watched when we were alone on the deck. So, Soren, mermaid, sea demon, I have no idea. I live in the Klamath Mountains in eastern Oregon, about 20 miles from the Californian border. Growing up, I spent a lot of time outside camping, hunting, fishing, etc. Well, a few months ago, I had a strange experience on a family trip to our cabin near Crater Lake, and I wanted to see if anybody else could help me maybe find more info on what I saw. So, I was by myself birdwatching in a small pond in the woods, maybe half a mile from the cabin in the late afternoon. I was sitting on a big log with binoculars. I wasn't in a blind or anything, but I picked a spot where I thought I'd be less visible to any animals. After about an hour, I hadn't seen much, except a few common ducks, and it didn't seem like many animals were very active, so I was thinking about leaving. This was maybe about an hour before sunset, I think. But then I saw something move in the trees across the pond, probably 100 feet away. It was just a flash between trees, and I didn't really get any kind of good look at it. But I kept watching the spot, and after maybe 5 minutes, I saw something dart from one tree to another. It was bigger than most any local bird, except maybe a heron, and moved very fast without making any noise. But I still didn't really know what I was looking at. This happened again a few minutes later, and then again a few minutes after that. Each time it seemed to be moving closer as well, to the pond that is. I don't think it knew that I was there, but it was staying incredibly well hidden, and only revealed itself for a split second at a time. At this point, I'm thinking maybe it's a kit fox or a pine marten because of how fast and silently it moved. But I still hadn't got a good look at it, any part of it, in any detail yet. It moved between trees a few more times, until it was behind a big dead tree right on the shore. I was staying as still and silent as possible, but still worried that it would see or more likely smell me and I would spook it. But after a few more minutes, I saw something move at the edge of the water. A little arm and hand that looked just like a human's reached out and touched the mud, and then the head and the other arm came into view as it leaned out to drink from the water. I could only see the head and the shoulders and arms from where I was, but they looked so much like a person's, except it was way too small and covered in what looked like, I don't know, like grayish-brown fur. The face wasn't exactly human either, more monkey-like, but it was too far away to see much detail. I decided to lift my binoculars to get a closer look, but as soon as I moved, it looked up and then disappeared back behind the tree again. I watched until it started to get dark, but I didn't see it again, not even darting behind the trees. I went back to the cabin and I told my grandpa what I saw. He's been a rancher in this area his whole life, and he said, "Sounds like you ran into a hide-behind," and just laughed. I said, "No, Grandpa, seriously, this isn't a joke." He said that he'd heard stories about Bigfoot and hide-behinds and several times saw little human footprints on hunting trips deep in the mountains where, really, no children would be. What I mean is that I think he believed me, but he really didn't know much. I asked my dad and brothers, but they just started giving me a hard time about squatching. I went back to the pond the next day and walked around to where the creature had been, but I didn't find any tracks or scat or fur or anything. I did figure that it had to be probably about 3.5 or 4 feet tall based on the trees that I'd seen it near, but narrow enough to hide completely behind a pine, which makes me think that it must have been standing and moving upright. And really, that's it. I wish I'd seen more of it, but that face and hands were absolutely not like any local animal. It looked very much like a monkey or a furry little human. I've tried to find more info, but the only cryptid people seriously talk about in this area is Bigfoot. The hide-behind seems to be like a joke around here. There may be little people or humanoids in some of the local Native American folklore, but not a lot of detail that I could find. Anyway, I really do hope someone here has some idea as to what I might have seen. It was a very unique and memorable experience, and any further information would be appreciated very much. My name is Anastasia, and a few days ago, something happened that, whenever I think about it, makes me feel sick. You see, we moved to an East Coast town about maybe a year ago to be closer to family. So close, in fact, that my aunt, her wife, and my cousins are only 10 minutes walk from my house. Granted, we are very spaced out and borderline rural despite living about 15 minutes from the outskirts of a big city. But in any case, I was walking my 2 little dachshunds back home from my aunt's house. My mum hates it when I'm alone the majority of the day, so I spend time at their house, and I was genuinely enjoying my time. It was cold and quiet, but oddly beautiful that day. I got home, fed my pups and 2 birds, and FaceTimed a friend. I was talking with them and doing chores, and was admittedly being loud and giggly when taking out the trash to the cans on the side of my house. I get back inside and lay down in bed still chatting, when my bird starts calling out at something. Now, anyone who has owned a parrot knows that they have a distinct noise for certain moments. She's been in my family for like 76 years and with me my whole life, so I knew the sound was alarm or intrigue. I brush it off as her seeing herself in the window reflection and go back to talking to my friend. I get up to get some water and my back is to the sliding glass door, thankfully locked, when my friend has the wind knocked out of him. I'm confused and think that he's hurt, and he tells me, "Go back to your room now." I initially scoff, but then I see it in my camera view. There is a man with his face and hands pressed up against the glass door. He's a middle-aged white guy in a grey pullover and dark pants, and with a grin on his face. My friend, ever the best in panic situation, tells me, "Don't look at him, just go to your room." I was shaking so hard. I'm blubbering and decide to lock me and my dogs in my closet. My parrot is still going crazy, mind you. English isn't my first language, and it's bad when I'm shocked, so I revert back to my native language, which he doesn't know. Luckily, my friend knows to take charge, and he tells me that he'll be over in 10 and he calls the police. I'm thinking that I can run to my mum's room and find the gun, so if the guy comes into the house, I can blow a quarter-sized hole in his chest if I need to. I'm debating getting up when I hear tapping on my window. It's slow and intentionally creepy, and my stupid dog starts barking. I'm ready to accept my death at this point. I'm a teenage girl, home alone, and I am about to die, it seems. But wait, my aunt should about to be leaving for work at this point. I shoot her a quick text telling her that there's a man at our place. The tapping has stopped, and I then think it's over when I realize something that makes my heart fall into my stomach. I left the front door unlocked when I took out the trash. This keeps getting worse, and I beg my friend to hurry. The tapping thankfully returns to my window, and I can only close my eyes and hope that someone gets here quickly. It felt like such a long time crying to another teen who's breaking multiple traffic laws. Never before have I been so grateful to hear another man's voice yelling outside of my house at 1 a.m. It was my God-sent neighbor. Apparently, his pregnant wife was having bad nausea and went out on the deck, and where it's situated, you can see my whole backyard. She got a bad feeling after seeing the unfamiliar man approach my door and woke her husband up to check it out. And honestly, I thank God every day for that woman, because I think she may have actually saved me. I let my neighbors into my house, and my aunt comes about 4 minutes later, packing major heat. My friend was not long after her. I went from home alone to an impromptu house party of concerned people. The police get there like 10 minutes later, and they didn't just take 30 minutes to arrive to the scene either, which is not normal, right? On the brighter side, my bird wasn't too alerted by this encounter and went back to eating not 5 minutes later, and my dogs were just as happy to see all the people as I was. My friend has been staying the nights with me since then. I'm honestly finding it hard to be home alone at this point, despite the fact that an arrest was actually made. I'm thankful that my neighbor had such good instincts and that my aunt and friend were so quick on their feet, because honestly, this could have been just so much worse. My great-grandfather homesteaded in Alaska before all the housing developments and heavy traffic came in. It used to be a really quiet area, very swampy, super cold in winter. You'd walk through the swamp and hit patches not quite frozen all the way through, even in the deepest part of winter. Now, obviously, that in and of itself isn't unusual. Running water doesn't always freeze. It's a geological active area too. There's reasons for that. However, my great-grandfather spent time in Ireland before settling in Alaska, and he liked to tell how when he was there, he rescued a pair of fairies and made a pact with them, in exchange for being able to see things nobody else could. He'd apparently take them with him and provide alcohol to their liking. When he settled in the homestead, he liked to tell this story, that he brought the fairies with him. And so long as they had a drop of alcohol and good company in the cold winter, there they would stay. Now, we did see something on occasion at the swamp, not just as kids too, but even as adults. They looked like fireflies or a ball of light, mostly in white, but you'd see one in red or blue now and again. Not like slightly red or slightly blue, like red M&M or blue M&M sort of color, but glowing type of red or blue. We also saw them inside the cabin a couple of times. Sometimes they would follow you or collect nearby while we were chopping firewood, but not always. The red one was almost always around when someone got hurt though. We were all fairly convinced that it made bad things happen. I'm not sure if people outside of our family saw them, but I do know everyone within my immediate family had at least a handful of direct experiences with them, and at least one negative experience with the red light, or fairy as my family's always called it. The cabin had a sort of lodge-style design, I suppose. The rooms were lofted and to either side of the living room, kind of like in hotels, where there's an open middle section, banisters surrounded it, with rooms on opposite sides. And while none of that really matters all that much, except that from upstairs, you could see either side of the wall dividing the kitchen and the sunroom, and on more than one occasion, you would see these little balls of light hit the wall and just keep going out the other side. You would also hear whistling sometimes, kind of an echo of what my great-grandfather sounded like when he was drinking, and as he liked to say, chatting with the fairies in his putter room. It would happen when you were in the swamp as well and in the house, and when you were the only one on the property at all. The homestead burned down shortly after my great-grandfather passed away, maybe 7 years ago, and so far, nobody is in a hurry to rebuild there. I do wonder sometimes, though, if the lights are still out there or the whistling, but I'm really not in any rush to go and find out. Mainly because, I don't know, something tells me that they're not fairies. This happened last night, and I'm still pretty freaked out about it. We're up at my father-in-law's for Christmas. He lives in South Jersey, in a pretty remote area just north of Bern State Forest. It's quiet and always a little eerie, but felt especially weird with the overcast weather and unseasonable warmth of the last few days. We did Christmas dinner at my brother-in-law's and got back pretty late. Because of the radiator heat and outside temps, we slept with the window open that night. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom, and as I was drifting back to sleep, I heard a low wail, building in volume for a few seconds before stopping abruptly. I figured that it was just an odd-sounding bird and tried to go back to sleep. It happened twice more over the course of about 5 minutes, though. I was basically able to put it out of my head and start drifting back to sleep when I heard a loud, shrill blast like a too-high elephant's trumpet. At this point, I shot up, heart racing. I knew that I had to close the window, and it took a bit to build up to it. When I dragged myself out of bed, I peeked through the shutters before I reached to shut the pane, and whatever it was had tripped a motion sensor light at the back of the property and was now half illuminated, standing maybe 100 feet from the back door, right at the tree line. It was cloaked, with its head partially shrouded. The bottom of its face looked flat and round like the back of a dinner plate, with another smaller, half-uncovered black circle at its center. It was humanoid, and that was enough for me. I immediately slammed the window shut and it didn't move, just stood there with its face tilted towards the window. I shut the blinds and crept back into bed and basically hid until the sun came up. I didn't hear any more sounds after that. I dared another look out of the window after dawn and the figure was now gone. I managed to drift back to sleep for a few hours after that too. So, has anyone seen anything like this or know what it might be? I'm frantically Googling, but nothing is really coming up. I don't know what it is. I've lived in the same house for the last 18 years and it's only gotten worse too. I live in an old coal mining town in Pennsylvania. I know that my house is haunted, but I believe that to be beside the point. Something is stalking my family. The first encounter I had was in the early 2010s. I heard my name being called repeatedly from far away, and it sounded like my friend. Started walking towards home and turned because I felt like I was being watched. I saw a dark humanoid figure that was at least 7 or 8 feet tall, and upon seeing it, I ran home. Things were fairly quiet as far as I can remember up until the last few years, but recently things have been amping up a lot. It started as rustling in the woods and the feeling of being watched. Next came the deer. So many deer. There was one too that I recall seeing multiple times in the same spot for a few days on my way home that just didn't look right. The most recent encounters has left me researching what to do. You see, 2 nights ago, my mum saw a pale white face with glowing eyes pressed up against the front door. She said that she froze in fear and didn't know what to do. Tonight, I got home after dark and walked toward my house. Seconds after I locked my car, I heard a blood-curdling scream come from the train tracks, followed by a very calm voice yelling "help me" very loudly. I froze in fear for a solid 15 seconds just listening. I slowly walked up my porch steps, just listening to 2 different voices screaming at once, one frantic and screeching, while the other was calm and just called out for help. I yelled in the front door for my mum because the frantic voice sounded vaguely like my younger sister, but I thought maybe she was messing around. When she came outside, it grew quiet and the frantic voice had stopped. We then heard "help me" 1 or 2 more times, faintly, but then nothing. My sister, she was at a friend's house, and so it was definitely not her. We went to pick up dinner, and there were deer everywhere again. Now, this isn't completely uncommon for PA to see a ton of deer, but like I said before, these ones were weird. They stared right at you and they never ran from the car at all, even if they were in the middle of the road too. So, someone, please help me and tell me what the heck is going on. What are these things? I have no idea what to do. The last month has been filled with fear and paranoia. You see, I had this incident around a month back. I don't know what the time in the night was that this happened, but I'm certain that it was in the AM. I just woke up with this feeling of dread and fear. My room was lit in a dark blue from my LED lights. Near the door to my room stood my mum. I called out to her quietly. As she approached the foot of my bed slowly, it became evident that it was not my mum, only looked like her. Her head began to tilt slowly as she stared at me. I moved to the foot of my bed to kick her away, but my foot went completely through her. She then disappeared and reappeared at the side of my bed and began approaching me closer. As quickly as she appeared, she then disappeared. I told my dad about it, but he said that it was just a nightmare, so I pretend like it didn't feel real. Until that same day, my friend and I were driving around. I've always known that she was a bit of a medium, as we're both paranormal investigators. However, this really cemented this for me. You see, I didn't tell her anything about this thing's appearance, but her eyes widened and she quickly drove out of the neighborhood that we were in. She was repeating to herself, saying, "We have to get out of here." She later described exactly what was there with me in my room, from the clothes to the height. That night we went to a Catholic church and we prayed. I've been praying every night since then, and I haven't been able to have the lights off at all. Everything was quiet too for a while, until the last 5 days, because 5 nights ago, I then froze in my bed. I was laying on my stomach and I felt a hand press on my shoulder. I couldn't move, but the same sense of dread filled me. 4 nights ago, I was laying on my side when I felt something brush my hair out of my face. Once again, I couldn't move. 3 nights ago, I was laying on my side when I felt someone laying behind me. I was completely frozen in fear and dread. The last 2 nights have been sleepless, and even last night I cried to God begging for protection. So my question for all of you guys is, does anyone know what this thing is, or how I can protect myself, or maybe even get rid of it? So, I've had several supernatural experiences, and I figured that I would share some that have stood out. I worked as an officer at a prison, and although I've moved on to a new facility, I have been an officer for the past 12 years. One of the major skills I've learned is how to retain and recall details, which helps recount events that I witness. This makes report writing much easier, and is helping me recount these events here as well. The prison I worked at was the oldest operational in my state and was built in the 1870s in an old style with a big brick wall that runs the prison's perimeter. The place has been updated over the years, but some areas that still operated had little done to them since it was built. Now, when I started, the old heads told all of us that the place was haunted, given everyone who had died over the years. Different places more than others, like the old unit that was a segregation, or what some people might know as the hole, with all the prison graffiti. I never gave it much thought because if I do not experience it, then it is just a cool story, but not confirmed. Now, I worked there for around 8 months when I first saw something strange. I was working overtime at night on what's called a one-on-one, where you have to watch a prisoner who is feeling suicidal and make sure that they don't do anything. It meant that I needed to stay up all night and check to make sure that the prisoner was breathing every 15 minutes, and I had a partner who walked by every 28 minutes, so I knew that I was awake. It was about 2 a.m. and I had just used my flashlight to illuminate the cell of the prisoner that I was watching and confirm that he was breathing. I looked down to mark the check on my clipboard and I saw movement out of the corner of my eyes. My partner had just done his round 15 minutes prior, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't be any movement down there. I turn and see someone doing a round on the housing unit, but he isn't right. This guy is wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap, shiny black leather belt, and has a baton in his hand. The problem is that these uniforms haven't been used by my department since the 1950s, and our uniforms are not blue. They're grey and modern, whereas this one was very much old. I watched this guy walk down the unit for maybe 5 seconds, and then I shook my head and slapped my face to make sure that I was awake. When I looked back, there was no one there anymore. The next thing that happened was roughly 2 years later during my normal shift. Now, the central building of the prison I worked in is a big room called a rotunda. It has 2 floors, but it is open, so you can see the balcony up on the top levels, and anyone who is leaving the rotunda can be seen from the opposite side, even on the balcony. The doors into the wings that branch off the balcony all have windows, and most of the rooms directly connected have windows too. It was maybe 2100, and I was going to the rotunda to complete some paperwork with a co-worker for my sergeant, which is pretty common. As we were opening the open barred gate to go into the rotunda, I looked up and I noticed that the administrative wing lights appeared to be dimmed through the window into the door. I commented to my co-worker that we would need to report that a light was out in the administrative wing. It was then that we were both looking at the window that we observed something move in the window, and we realized that this was not a light malfunction, that instead a shadow person, or something like that, was standing in front of the window. While we were watching this shadow move to its left and through a solid wall into another room, we saw its silhouette through the window of that room. Well, we just looked at each other and we kept going. The third experience that I had, I was about 3 years in as an officer by the point that this one happened. I was working the 3rd shift in the control center, which is where we use the cameras and security measures and all that. Also, I should mention that there are several rifle posts around the prisoner's perimeter that are used to ensure the security of the prison, but we only ever used like 3 of them during operational hours. In this case, it's important for you to know that when a phone is left off the hook, the phone rings into the control center so that we can address the issue. When the call rings through, you can pick up the phone and hear anything on the other end that may be being said in the area, which is important in case we're dealing with a staff assault or a hostage situation or something like that. So, I'm working as the electronic monitoring officer, which means the camera controls are my main responsibility, along with the perimeter security. As I'm working, the phone rings and the institutional caller ID says 1 post, which is odd because that post is not used because it's too small for a modern person to comfortably fit inside of it. Also, at this time there is nobody that should be near it, and for someone to reach it, they would have to set off at least 2 security alarms, which I was in charge of monitoring. Given the fact that the guy who was doing the perimeter checks was a bit of a prankster, I guess you could say, I figured that it was just him playing a prank and that he knew a way around the sensors somehow. So I answer the phone and all I hear is static, which is continuously increasing and decreasing in volume. Like someone has an old television on a static-filled channel and is moving the volume up and down constantly. I hang up the phone and move the camera to look at the post, and I can see right inside there that there is no one in there. As I'm looking at it, the phone rings again as an off-the-hook at 1 post. This time, my lieutenant picks up the phone and, after a minute, walks back to me asking if the perimeter officer is playing games, because he can hear mumbling blurred out by static from 1 post. He sees that I have the camera pointed at it, and that there is no one in there. The lieutenant tells me to have the perimeter officer check it because an animal may have gotten in the post and knocked the phone off the hook or something. The officer took a while to get there as he had been on the other side of the perimeter, and he had to climb 5 flights of stairs to get there. During this time, the phone has continued to ring from 1 post until I can see the officer opening the door, at which point the phone just stops ringing. The officer opens the door with his flashlight on and calls over the radio that there's no phone in the post. My lieutenant responds that there must be one because the calls keep coming through. In response, the officer holds up a disconnected phone line so that the camera can see it, and says that is the only thing in the post. This post has not been used since like the early 80s, I think. Like I said, it was way too small of a space. The phone would still ring now and again on the 3rd shift until we updated our phone system to an internet-based system, upon which it stopped. This next experience, I had been an officer for about 4 years at this point. I was working my regular shift as the electronic monitoring officer. I went on a restroom break, which means that I had to leave my post and go about 100 yards away to the nearest restroom. As I'm in the restroom, I distinctly hear the sound of boots clapping on the tile floor of the hallway that leads to this restroom, among other rooms in that wing. As the sound gets closer to the restroom, I can hear the large folger keys that are clinking together on their waist as they walk. When it sounded like they were right outside the door, I called out saying, "I'll be out in a minute," and I didn't hear the sounds after I said that. Thinking that someone was waiting outside, I hurried up and washed my hands, not taking more than a few minutes. I opened the door and there was no one there. The hallway is long enough and has 3 entry doors that I would have heard open and close as well as any other door in the hallway, to where they would have had issues getting out of the hallway noiselessly in the time between me calling them and leaving the restroom. I returned to my post and I asked my sergeant if he saw anyone go into the wing while I was down there. He said that he didn't and asked why. Knowing that he was someone who believed in ghosts, given that he and I had talked about how he used to do independent paranormal investigations, I told him what happened. His face went slack and his eyes got large as he said, "Go check the video." I returned to my position and watched the video of that hallway, the hallway of the wing above that one, and the areas outside the wing. And I confirmed that no one was in that area during that time, except for me, and there were no signs of distortions or anything. Now, the final one that I'll share for today is that I had been an officer for about 6 years and was working my regular shift. I was watching the medication lines after the diner lines were done, and my sergeant was talking with me. Not like a management thing, but we were friends and just wanted to have a conversation while ensuring that prisoners weren't passing meds or fighting or worse. The medical hallway that I was watching is connected at one end to the rotunda and at the other end to one of the main housing blocks, specifically right next to our main segregation unit. As we were talking, we heard what sounded like muffled talking from a radio. Checking our radio, we realized that it was none of us, so we began searching the area around us. Given the location, there shouldn't be an unattended radio, so it was a security issue and of some concern. As we proceeded to search the area, we realized that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was making the sounds. This intercom, unlike a standard housing unit, is not used frequently, which is why we were surprised to find it transmitting sound. The sergeant points at it and says that it must be broken. The switch is in an off position and the activation light is off. I looked closely and I got goosebumps as I made a shocking discovery, saying, "Sarge, how is it doing that when it's not plugged in?" I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the intercom box and gave it a slight tug to show that it was attached directly to the box. The sergeant's face went completely white and he walked off shaking his head, just saying, "Nope," over and over again. These intercoms don't have backup batteries or anything too, and there are no direct power-up hookups or anything like that. Just the cord that I had already shown was disconnected. The sounds, though, they continued for the duration of the medication lines. I left the area after that, and I never heard of it doing that again. So, that's everything that I've experienced, but if you guys would like to hear more of the other stories that I've heard from there anyway, just let me know and I'll be sure to share some more. Thanks for listening, and if you're interested in doing a job like this, please do not let stories like this get in the way, because it really is a very fulfilling career. So this all starts with a guy named Daniel. Daniel was at one time an acquaintance of my ex-husband. He was never my favorite person, honestly, as he was kind of an incel, I guess, a lifelong drug addict, and also had a chip on his shoulder because his family had money. He was a liar, thought that he was slick, and did creepy stuff like once I came home and he was folding my clothes out of the dryer. I don't know why he thought I would approve of such, including folding my underwear into tiny little squares with a lot of care. You get it though, Daniel is a loser. And look, I know that that's mean, but he really has no redeeming qualities. Thankfully, after a while, their associate friendship runs its course and he sort of fades into obscurity as a bad memory. I hear very little concerning him for the next 10 or so years, save one thing: he has lost his mind. But that's just a throwaway statement a lot of the times. So-and-so has gone crazy and lost their mind. I had the thought that he'd always been like that, and forgot about him once again. About 2 years ago, I pull up to my house though, and notice a side-by-side sport utility vehicle in my driveway that I've never seen before. When I walk in, I see this unkempt, wild-eyed looking man that appeared homeless, really. I followed my husband to our room and whispered, "Who the heck is that guy?" And he looked surprised and says, It's Daniel. He's, well, sort of insane now. Apparently his family keeps him in the house mostly because he doesn't do well in public and freaks people out now. But he stole their side-by-side and drove it over an hour to our house, where he has run out of gas to go back home. I instantly get a bad feeling when I see him, before I even know it's Daniel. This guy's aura is just all wrong. His vibe is messed up, and I get even more and more wigged out the longer that he is here, because he's having a full-on conversation with, well, himself. This was sinister, and I didn't like his replies to whatever he was talking to as well. Whatever was speaking to him was saying hostile things about us. For example, he listened intently, then laughed wildly and shook his head. No, they ain't like that. That is funny, though. Like, what the heck, right? I'm just trying not to make him feel any type of way, because I know that this may not be something that he can control or help, and I don't want to make him uncomfortable or embarrassed, but I'm getting more and more uncomfortable myself the longer this goes on. Finally, after like 20 minutes of talking to something, he sort of looks at me sheepishly and says, "I apologize, I have demons, but I'm working on that." I nod and tell him that I understand. My husband rounds up some gas by his side-by-side, and then he leaves. At first, I'm really relieved because I was feeling really freaked out by the time that he bounced. When I knew that he was gone, I was sitting on my bed doing some craft project, and my husband is in the master adjoined bathroom doing something with a tool. I then quiz him. What the heck is Daniel talking to? He tells me that he believes that he's talking to demons that follow him and tell him things, and so he was speaking to a demon with a full-on conversation, at least in his mind, which heightens my bad vibe meter to the max, let me tell you. I tell him that I don't feel comfortable with him in my home. I don't want him back here where me and my children are. He's dangerous. I do pity him, but I just instinctively know that he's dark and dangerous. My husband says okay, and he doesn't think he'll be coming back anyway. Quite suddenly, though, I then feel a pain in my arm like I cannot describe. For a few moments, I really think that my husband has accidentally shot metal across the space with whatever he was doing with that buzzing Dremel tool, and he's just shot the heck out of me. I put my flat hand over the inside of my arm, below the elbow and above the wrist, and put pressure, but it doesn't stop. Intense pain, a weird pain like I've never felt before. I scream. I move my hand to look, but don't see any blood, so I couldn't have been hit with shrapnel from this tinkering or anything. But I did see sort of half-moon claw prints dug into my arm, like someone had grabbed it and just sunk their nails into it. Not scratched, just dug in. There were at least 40 to 50 between my inner wrist and inner elbow, and to my horror, I literally watched while more appeared right in front of my eyes. I yelled for my husband to come here, and I showed him my arm and asked him what it looked like to him. "Dang, who clawed you up like that?" was his response. I shook my head and said nobody, and explained what had just happened before they appeared out of, well, seemingly nowhere. What he did next sent a chill down me. Daniel didn't leave his demon here when he left, and it's clawed you up, did he? He jokingly said with a little laugh. He was kidding, but as soon as he said it, I knew that it was true. It didn't like me talking about Daniel like that, and it clawed me up to punish me. I told him not to say that, and I quietly freaked out about it until I went to bed and tried to keep it off my mind. A couple of days later, we were laying in bed and my husband was spooning me with his arm draped over my side. He had just nodded off when I felt that weird otherworldly pain in my side under his arm, and I just knew that it had clawed me again. I cried out and shook him awake in a panic, and I asked him to move his arm before raising my shirt and asking what my side looked like. He looked crazy and said it looked clawed up like my arm had, and he watched me while more claw marks sprung up until my side was covered in them. Honestly, he was pretty much as shook as I was. Well, almost. Throughout the next few months, I always felt like I was being watched too. I would randomly get this same weird type of pain, followed by some type of mark in the pained area. I basically had to exercise my house over and over. It would work for like a week or two, and then it would always come back. Not as strong, but it definitely kept coming back. Looking back, I sincerely believe that Daniel isn't just hearing voices that aren't really there. I think that the demons that he says that he talks to are exactly what he says they are. I think that the one that he dragged up into my house that night either decided I was weak and it would get to me, it saw something in me that it liked and wanted, or it sought to punish me for talking about Daniel the way that I did. Whatever the case, it was seeking only me because nothing had happened to anyone else in the house. There was also a lot of DV in our home, and I was the victim of it. I think that it was feeding on the negativity in the home. I felt like it was always just on the edges, lurking or waiting to be able to get back in to get to me, and it was awful. I've since divorced and moved on, and I came to a better place spiritually. But this experience taught me that what you don't believe in, you cannot defend yourself from. And I, for one, will never make that mistake again. I'm 30 now, but this happened when I was 16, and it has just always stuck with me. I was playing some OG Paper Mario one afternoon after school, and as I was playing, I heard my mother call me from downstairs. I paused and called back, "Yeah, what's up? Come down to the office, please. I need help with something." "Okay, I'll be right there," I said as the good and helpful son that I was. I went downstairs to the office to find it empty. Confused, I went to the kitchen, my mother's bedroom, all the places that she'd normally be. I even went to the garage to find that her car wasn't even there. I went to the living room to find my father reading the paper. I asked him where Mum was, and he said that she wasn't even home yet. I stood there for a while processing that information before my dad asked what was wrong. I told him that I definitely heard Mum asking me for help in the office. He simply shrugged and said that he didn't know what to tell me, and went back to reading his paper. So, yeah, something called out to me in the voice of my mother asking for help, and my mother definitely wasn't home. The whole thing has confounded me to this day. This is going to be a little bit lengthy, as this has been an occurrence in my life over the course of the past 10 years, so I apologize for the length of this. Now, I'm a believer in the paranormal world due to other experiences, but I am also open to the fact that this could be sleep deprivation or stress induced, I guess, but the moment of times that I've dealt with this and the fact that I have been consciously awake every time, it definitely makes me wonder. I'm 30 years old now, and my first encounter began in 2012 while I was a freshman at college. I was on academic probation over a long weekend, so the rest of my roommates were gone for the weekend and I was stuck in my dorm for the weekend all by myself. One night, as I had finished my homework and was tired of mindlessly scrolling through my phone, I got unusually tired and fell asleep in my bed at around 8 p.m. with the lights on. After about 20 minutes into my snooze, I felt like I wasn't alone all of a sudden and just sort of jolted awake. Now, our beds were over our desks in a sort of bunk configuration. I rolled over and looked into the middle of the room below me and was shocked to see a humanoid figure curled up into the fetal position. I honestly thought that I was dreaming, so I just continued to blink and rub my eyes and was telling myself to wake up, but soon realized that I wasn't dreaming at all. After about 30 seconds, it seemed to register that I was staring at it, and it slowly stood up. I was in complete utter shock and I just froze. It looked just like a person, but with no face or hair features, no clothes, just humanoid opaqueness, I guess. I couldn't even discern gender. It was about 5'9" and slowly walked towards my direction. Nothing felt evil or malicious about it, but I didn't want to test that theory by any means. Unfortunately, it was between me and the door, and I had to run past it to escape my room. I yelled at it to stop approaching me. As soon as my fight or flight instinct overrode my being frozen in fear, and as it was only 3 feet away from me, I jumped from my bunk onto the floor and bolted past it. Mind you, it never reached out or interfered with my escape as I ran into the halls of my dorm with pure adrenaline and fear. With it being a weekend, there was hardly anybody present, but I cooled myself down and quickly walked to find the closest human contact that I could find. I finally found one of my friends down the hall who was still present. As to not sound insane, I didn't tell a soul of my experience. I chalked it up to being tired and stressed with school, but unfortunately, I had to eventually make my way back to my room to sleep alone again. I finally summoned the courage to leave my friend's room and go back to mine after a few hours. I entered my room and there was nothing there. I stayed awake with the lights on for the rest of the night with an uneasy feeling, but nothing else happened. Fast forward to 2013. My roommates and I had switched to a different room. Every year we had to switch rooms. Nothing else had happened until late fall, and this time all of my roommates were present, and it was a school night, and we had all just begun to fall asleep, 3 of us total. Once again I got that uneasy feeling, and once again I rolled over to find that humanoid figure standing near the head of my bed, reaching up towards me this time. I absolutely freak and wake up my roommates, who throw the light on. As soon as the light came on, it had disappeared. To my roommates' justifiable annoyance, they told me to go to sleep and that I'm just imagining things. This occurs 2 more times throughout my college years, with the last college incident occurring in my senior year. Once again, I was asleep and awoke to an uneasy feeling. I had accidentally left my closet open, and as I peered into it, I saw the figure again, just standing there staring into me. I fixate on it, just telling myself that it's just my overactive imagination. But as I was wishing it away, it stepped out of the closet, and just like the other times, it begins to approach me. I scream at it, demanding it to not take a step closer or else, and then it just disappeared into, nothingness. I then graduate and join the military. Thinking that it was just college-induced stress, I felt like the encounters would end, especially with me leaving my old dorm for my first duty station in Florida. At this point, I'm engaged to my now wife and have 2 dogs. And to shorten the now long story, the shadow people, they would continue to follow me. It didn't matter which apartment or house I would move to, I would never be able to escape the terrifying encounters of whatever these things are. It would always start with my dogs growling at our bedroom doors, and then full manifestations. My wife would awake me to shouting at something, demanding it not to come closer and to leave me and my family alone. It would absolutely freak my wife out as she could not see the figures I was confronting. Each visit, it would just get a little closer before disappearing after I confronted it. It would always get close, but it would never actually reach me. I could also sense that it was never the same shadow person, and each subsequent visit, it seemed more foreboding and with negative intent. It also had this weird sort of pull to it as well, like it was drawn to me. This happened about 4 or 5 times from 2017 to 2019, and this leads me to the final encounter that I had in 2020. My wife was pregnant with my son at the time, and I was a month out from deployment, knocking out my pre-deployment training. This last encounter was different from the rest too. and was the single most terrifying paranormal or stress-induced event that I've ever witnessed. I was asleep with my wife in my bed. I had only been asleep maybe an hour when I woke up because I couldn't breathe. I had felt two hands wrapped around my neck and weight on my chest. As I struggled to breathe, I saw the shadow person above me this time, and it felt like it was trying to suffocate me. I hadn't even registered it as a shadow person. I thought it was a home invader at first. I wrestled with it, or at least it felt like I was, and I could feel it and grab it this time. But once I got the upper hand, it sprung to the bedroom floor and crawled under my bed. My wife was already awake as I was thrashing about. Thinking that it was an intruder, I was trying to find a weapon and told my wife to escape the house and call the cops. She, of course, refused and told me that it was all a bad dream. I looked under the bed to find nothing there, of course. My wife told me that I was just stressed with the upcoming deployment. I was incredibly embarrassed and utterly terrified. I saged the house just in case and tried to work on my stress. And weirdly enough, that was the last encounter, and I haven't had another one since then. Now, I know that this could all be psychological, but it doesn't take away how terrifying it is in the moment. Of note is the fact that I'm never half awake. I'm always wide awake when I went through these encounters. I don't have sleep paralysis and I don't sleepwalk. I hardly tell this story to anyone unless they're a believer in the paranormal, as I know that it sounds super made up and I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't have gone through it. I just know what I experienced and how it made me feel. Most won't believe my story, and that's fine. I'm sharing this to see if anyone else has had a similar experience with shadow people or could explain the psychological reason if there are any. I guess the only thing that would go against that psychological reasoning is the fact that my dogs, they always seem to react to it as well. This happened when I was 15 and my little sister was 12. A little bit of backstory here. We lived in this small town for several years and it was a very safe place. A few years into living there, we had a cop with his wife and kids move in 2 houses down from us. Our house was built sometime in the 1920s, I think. A few nights before this incident, our other siblings locked us out of the back door. Us being idiots, we kicked the back door in. The door didn't budge, but the frame came out of the wall and the door was just hanging there. One of our blinds were broken and we didn't have the money to fix it, seeing as my parents had 8 kids and money was really tight growing up. Anyways, the blinds were broken behind our TV. On the other side of the window was a garage and our driveway. Next to the driveway on our neighbor's property, which was abandoned and had tall shrubs. What we didn't know was that there were 2 people hiding in the shrubs, watching us. I'm going to leave a few details out to make a long story short, but if you have any questions, then please do drop them below. My little sister's name is Candace and my name is Aria. So, it was the summer of 2009. My oldest brother and his girlfriend were a mile from our house fishing about 10 at night. Fishing, right? All of our siblings and parents were asleep. Besides my older brother out with his girlfriend fishing, I was sitting in front of the TV watching it. Candace was sitting in the bed watching TV with me too. When all of a sudden, Candace and I heard a very loud crash noise from the back door. We both screamed. We got up, ran to the phone and called our brother's cell phone. He said that he was on his way because his girlfriend apparently twisted her ankle. He gets home and by this point, we woke everyone up in the house and had all the lights on. My brother tells us to stay in the house. My brother is 6'4" and 300 pounds. Unknown to my family, I slipped outside to check with my brother. I know it was stupid of me to do this, but I was a curious kid. I saw my brother being really quiet. He ran back to our fenced-in backyard and he gets within arm reach of this guy and he steps on a stick. The guy turns and looks back at my brother and takes off running and hops the fence, and he got away, sadly. I unfortunately didn't see all this because I went back into the house after a while. This is just what my brother told me. But my brother comes in and he tells everyone that he saw a guy all in black and he's about 6 foot, and that's all that he saw. The rest of the night was pretty much calm, my brother on high alert though. The next night my brother was out with his girlfriend wherever they were at the time. It was again about 10 at night. Candace and I were watching TV again in the same spot as last time. Again we hear a loud crash coming from the back door. We screamed again and called our brother's cell phone again, and he came home again. The whole house was awake again and all the lights on. My brother goes out and checks it out, and this time he didn't see anyone out there. Oh, I forgot to mention too, both of these times, we looked at the back door and both times the back door looked like it was kicked really hard. This time around the frame was out of the wall more and the door was leaning further into the house at this point. We didn't make a police report because we had a cop that lived 2 houses down from us. But while he was at work, us kids would help take care of his pregnant wife, bring her over food, play with her kids and all that. We really didn't see him much, and when we did, he was really sweet and nice, but anyways, we told the police officer what had happened. He told us that he thinks that there are 2 guys out there and that they've been stalking our house and watching us. The cop comes over and checks and looks. He said that one of the guys seems to be on lookout and hides right here in the shrubs. He keeps lookout while the other one does the possible breaking in. He said that they had to have been looking through our broken blinds. He said that at night they could be looking in and you really couldn't see anything if you were looking out. After those 2 nights, there was no attempted break-ins anymore. But fast forward to the fall of that year and our cop neighbor told us. So, I'm not actually supposed to tell you all this, but we actually caught a peeping Tom. He's in jail now, about 20 or so miles away. And he said that after this peeping Tom got caught, that perhaps that's why everything stopped. That is, he suspected that this guy was the guy trying to break in. He said that the town was safe again because of this, and Candace and I were really freaked out and kind of scared. To this day, her and I always have our windows and doors always locked. We check multiple times a day, in fact. If any of our curtains are open, we get scared and we close the curtains every time. I'm honestly afraid that it'll happen again one day. We no longer live in that town, but that thought is definitely still there. To this day, we don't know what their intentions were, but I do think that if he would have gotten in, that there's a very good chance that we wouldn't be here today. And that is a scary thought. I was working at a small business in Iowa when a man came in for an interview. He was polite enough, but didn't really say much. But something about him just felt really off. While my boss interviewed him, I stocked shelves, listening to the man answer our standard questions. What's your availability? Have you ever been arrested? Things like that. When he left, the manager asked me what I thought. There's something weird about him. I got really bad vibes about him. The boss kind of chuckled at me and said, "We can't deny someone employment because of bad vibes." I took out my phone and Googled the guy's name. And he had been arrested a few months prior for threatening to shoot up a gas station after being accused of theft. He lied and said that he had never been arrested. Is that good enough reason to not hire someone? It was. And, as it turns out, it may have actually saved my life. I remember September 2018, a beautiful clear day, the calmness broken by the sound of police cars flying down the road. A student had been murdered in the middle of the day on a nearby golf course. She had passed a group of men, who very shortly later found her things abandoned on the ground. Concerned, they called management, and shortly after, she was found, her body floating in a pond. Everybody was in shock. This was the second murder of a young student Iowa had in just a few weeks. Was it a disgruntled fellow golfer? A jealous lover? No. The young woman had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She did not know her killer. He did not know her. He was a homeless man who was found in the woods by the golf course, saw an opportunity, and he took it. He had fantasies about these sorts of things, and the next day the story made headlines, and plastered on the front was the killer's face. My stomach turned when I saw him, because he looked just so familiar. I didn't recognize the name, but then again, I've never been good with names. But I remember stories, and so I googled his name. And the same story about a man being arrested for threatening to shoot up a gas station came up. And instantly, I knew who he was. It was the same man that I had convinced my boss not to hire. At the job, the majority of shifts there were only one or two of us working, which means that I definitely would have been alone with this guy at so many points, so many slow hours with few customers, so many blind spots. There would have been hundreds, possibly thousands of opportunities to be alone with him. It only took a few minutes for a murder to occur on a beautiful day on a golf course. So how much more opportunity would there have been if he had been hired? So yes, do trust your instincts, because if they're anything like mine, they may just save your life one day. A few years ago, I was awoken one Sunday morning by a phone call. It was a little girl, I would guess maybe around 4 years old, and she said, "Morning, Granddad." I laughed. She sounded sweet, and then gently explained to her that she dialed the wrong number, obviously. "Oh," she said, before hanging up. A few minutes later, the phone rings again. "Morning, Granddad." I laughed again and apologetically told her that she dialed the wrong number again. "Are you coming, Granddad? What time are you coming? Hurry up, we're about to get started." She was absolutely bursting with joy, and whoever her granddad was obviously a very lucky guy. It sounded like there was a birthday party or something going on like that. Still laughing, I tried to explain her mistake to her and said that obviously I'm not her granddad, before saying bye and hanging up the phone. I lay in bed laughing for a bit, but a minute later, the phone rings. "Morning, Granddad." The third time, I explained that I'm not her granddad. "You are my granddad, silly," she said with a bit of a funny tone now. She thought that I was her granddad playing a trick on her, and she thought that it was funny. Again, though, I explained that I am not her granddad, at which point she drops the phone and runs off into the background. I could hear her in the background saying, "Dad, Granddad is playing tricks on me. He won't talk to me." I could hear that she was getting slightly upset at this point. Then a man picks up the phone. "Dad, is everything okay?" the man says. So I, still finding this whole thing funny, explained to the man that his daughter had simply dialed the wrong number a few times and it's all a big misunderstanding. Then he says in a concerned tone, "Okay, Dad, are you at home? Stay where you are, we're on our way over." Now he thinks that I'm his dad. So again, not laughing anymore now, I explain that I'm not who he thinks I am, obviously, and that it's just the wrong number. What he said, though, really began to scare me a bit. He said, "My name, I'm really worried now. We'll be over in 15 minutes, don't move." At that point, I just hung the phone up and lay in bed wondering, what the heck just happened? They never called back, and I assumed that I'd just been pranked by a friend or something. But over the next few days, I asked everybody that I knew to own up to the prank, and everybody swore blind that it wasn't them. Not only was this girl convinced that I was her granddad, but the man also thought that I was his dad, and also said my actual first name. Now, obviously coincidences happen, but this was just weird. So, a few days later, still puzzled, I thought that I'd just ring the number back and see who answered, but the number wasn't in use. I just got a dead tone. That definitely was creepy. Who knows, maybe I was called by a grandkid in a parallel universe or something, and judging by the sound of her voice, the parallel me was one lucky guy, I guess. I just got back home from shopping and was parking my car. I was just about to open my door when, for some reason, I had an off feeling. I looked to my left and I saw a woman with a hood standing a few feet away from me. When she saw me, she stopped walking towards me and backed up a few steps. I pretended to look through my purse, hoping that she would know that I had seen her and that she would leave. She then went and hid behind my truck, so I couldn't see her any longer. My car doors are locked, but I didn't know what side that she was on. I waited for about 2 more minutes, and then I saw her run a few feet to the corner and hide beside a house. I kept looking back and kept seeing her peek her head out to see if I'd got out of the car yet. I called my dad and I asked if he could come to the car and help me walk home. He came running down the street with a bat and the woman left running. The moral of this story is always be aware of your surroundings. If I didn't look to my left, I would have been robbed or maybe even worse. Also, I now carry something with me in my hand anytime that I'm getting out of the car. The first 18 years of my life, I thought that aliens were some wild conspiracy cooked up by fringe believers with some type of mental health disorder overlay and possibly drug abuse issues as well. But then, the summer of 2001 happened, and I had to forget everything that I thought that I knew about this phenomena. My 2 friends and I headed up to the Canadian border. We wanted to head over into Montreal for gambling, hookers and cocaine, but they were still too young for that, and not yet 18. So instead we spent a few nights in a border town. We were sitting on the porch of the house that we were staying in, dead sober. It was hardly even midnight, and I was just gazing at the stars. We were talking about girls and what we needed to do with our lives. I started staring at this one star, or meteor, because it just didn't seem to be following the laws of physics and what I've come to expect from shooting stars or planets. And I got this, I don't know, like compulsion or a kind of feeling that I'd never felt before. I stood up, jumped over the railing, and began running toward the train tracks. I remember running with a focused goal and intent, but still thinking to myself, why am I doing this? I think I heard my friends yelling behind me, but listening to them did not get me up the stony hill any faster, and that thought just fell by the wayside. I remember scrambling up the rocks on all fours, and my fingertips just gently dancing across the stones. I made it to the middle of the tracks and stared up at this star. My 2 friends came running up behind me after some time, and they're out of breath. They ask what I'm doing. I don't really have a response, and I'm just staring. I don't even think that I turned my head, to be honest. I was just fascinated by this thing. I don't want to say that I was paralyzed, but I was certainly enthralled and compelled to just keep staring. I remember raising my hand to point at the star, and before my finger could finish pointing at it in a straight line, the craft was suddenly above us, and it was strange too. It wasn't as if this thing went from being a shooting star or meteor type deal and zipped across the sky, nor did it teleport. It moved from point A to point B just so quickly, and it was maybe 20 feet, 30 feet above us. There were no windows or lights. It was a solid, quicksilver-type disc that appeared to have a shifting surface. It did not disrupt the air like a helicopter. There was no dust from the crushed rocks or shaking of the nearby trees or anything. It was just very far away and then suddenly very close. I remember being startled that there wasn't a gust of air or screeching of brakes or some kind of thrusters to make it stop. It was really odd. One friend started shaking his head and started walking away with his arms straight down at his sides and his head facing forward and away, and saying, "This is not real. I am dreaming. This cannot be real," and walked back to the house and just never talked about it again. The other friend and I stood there for what felt like 5 seconds, but also 5 minutes. I said something to the effect of, "I want to believe it's not real, but, I mean, it's right there." We exchanged just very basic disbelief statements that came out very calmly and logically, but in hindsight were indicative of some type of shock, I guess. The craft didn't seem to do anything. We didn't see any aliens, we weren't abducted as far as I know, and very fortunately, we weren't on any drugs. I think I would have lost my mind completely had we been tripping or something, but it just sits with me weird because it's a rather uneventful encounter, like nothing really happened. But also, we saw a ship that was not from this world. I mean, how could it be? We don't even have drones like this today, and it's like 22 years later. It had some type of interest in us, or it never would have come close to us, I guess, but all it did was leave. No tractor beams, no searing lights, no radiation burns or missing organs or anything. Maybe I just had high hopes that seeing a craft this close meant that aliens and answering all the world's questions or whatever was about to happen. But it still sits really strangely with me all this time later, somewhere between the holy cow feeling and just a general lack of fulfillment. I consider myself lucky and blessed to have witnessed this, but again, no green men, no army response, no F-15s screeching across the sky or anything. It just seemed to stop by to say hi and then was gone. It's such a weird experience that I still don't know how to process something like this. There's just no way to wrap this up into a neat little bow, you know? It's just, well, strange. So, before I say anything, this is not a creepypasta or a fake story or anything like that. It's a real experience that I had, but that's up for you to decide, I suppose, if you believe me or think that I'm crazy or whatever, but this is not an attempt to make a creepypasta or just a scary story to amuse you. I'm no writer by any means. I'm a geography major in college. Perhaps a hallucination or creation of my mind at the time, but whatever it was, it felt very real to me. I've never had any mental illness other than depression or anxiety that are now medicated, but never anything more serious than that. At the time that this happened, I hadn't done any drugs other than a few beers after the incident to relax and get to sleep. So, this was in 2017. I was turning 18 at the time. I'm 23, nearly 24 now. I haven't told anyone in my personal life because of 2 reasons. One, they'd think that I'm either crazy or, more likely, making it up. And I have a reputation for not being a liar, making things up. I hate being called a liar, in fact, and have went out of my way in my life to be as honest as I can. If not, sometimes too honest, I suppose, but because I just hate being called a liar, even if I'm actually lying in this case by neglecting to tell it, or when someone asks me if I've ever had any supernatural experiences, I just say no, but honestly, I have. I just don't want people to think that I'm crazy or lying, but it's been years since this happened, and I just have to tell someone. So, here I am. Also, for what it's worth, I'm not religious by any means. I'd say that I'm agnostic, if anything. I don't really believe in the supernatural, but I also don't say that it's impossible, as I don't know everything. Far from it, in fact. But this story doesn't help. I don't believe in ghost stories for the most part, UFOs, etc. I'm very skeptical of that stuff and believe that there are explanations that are far less exciting than people would like to believe. But this is something that I've experienced that I cannot explain, and it still bothers me to this day when I think of it. I often have nightmares about it too. So, Some backstory first. My mother and little sister were going to visit my grandparents. They live near this little town called Eminence, Missouri, about 30 minutes south. I think south of the town, deep in the mountains. In any case, it wasn't super remote. There were neighbors a few miles away and such. They were hillbilly types, as you could imagine. It's deep in the Ozarks in Missouri, so yeah, lots of missing teeth and meth and crazy old mountain folk. If you've been in the Missouri hills, then you know what I mean. We were staying in a camper about 200 or so foot from the grandparents' house, my mum, sister and I. And one day, a few hours before dark, I decided to get onto the four-wheeler and go into the woods. I had toyed around in the woods, hills a bit, but I wanted to go deep in there on a four-wheeler and have some fun. So I filled the four-wheeler up, asked my grandparents where the trail was. There was a trail that you could take to ride horses down, four-wheelers and stuff like that. It was a one-way road with no turn-offs to get lost, so that's where they told me to go, and I drove off. I rode for about 40 minutes in one direction until I was nearly half out of gas, and about this time I was searing for a place to turn around and head back. It was a small and narrow trail though, so I had to wait until there was a small clearing to do a U-turn. But here is where things get weird. Now, I remember as I was riding, the trees blowing in the wind, the birds singing, the animal noises, the woodpeckers, all the wonderful noises of nature that I love so much from the woods. And suddenly, they all just stopped. I mean, it just went completely dead silent, just on a dime. I mean, dead silent, not a single sound. At this, I remember goosebumps going all over my body just from the lack of noise alone, knowing that there were animals around, but everything just going quiet like that. It felt like I was in a noise vacuum or something, but everything felt different, sounded different, or more accurately, sounded like nothing at all. The only noise was the burring from the four-wheeler, and that was pretty much it. As I was riding down the mountain, I saw a huge deer, or antlered deer-like animal, and I mean it was massive, standing in the pathway that I was driving on, about, I don't know, maybe 50 foot in front of me or something. Not exactly sure, but close, but not too close. It wasn't there, and then 1 second, it was. It wasn't moving. It was just staring at me. And like I said at first, it seemed like maybe a buck or a deer or something. But then I looked closer and it had really dark black eyes, like I was staring into nothingness. Intense darkness that stood out from the color of the forest really clearly. Like I said too, I still have nightmares every now and then about this thing, just staring at me. The antlers were nearly the size of its body itself, but the antlers looked weird, like tree roots or something. I'm not too familiar with deer, if I'm being completely honest. I've never really hunted or anything, but just the antlers were, I don't know, they didn't look like anything I've ever seen on a deer or any animal that has antlers. They were too large and too spindly or windy sort of. Something about it just looked terribly off, and I could feel my heart jump into my throat all of a sudden. I stopped the four-wheeler instantly and just stared at it. I was terrified, but also couldn't help but stare back at it. While it stared at me, I remember the wind started blowing and the rustling of the trees occurred. It sounded like the trees were almost speaking to me in a language too. Or maybe I was just hearing things and scared out of my mind. I don't know, but I remember getting the feeling that I was being told to leave and never return. That's how I felt anyway, but again, I'd never heard those words spoken, so if there was a language, it was something that I'd never heard before. It was more a feeling, I guess, that I can't explain it very well, but I may not have understood the language, but it was very clear that I needed to leave. Like, if you were in a country where you didn't speak their language, and you came up to their house door and started hearing them yell at you to leave, you may not understand the language, but you know what they're telling you, right? That's how this felt. But in a language of wind or trees or nature. I know how insane that sounds, but that's just how it felt at the time. So I did. I left. I hightailed it and bolted out of there. I turned the four-wheeler around, nearly toppling it off the trail and falling down some 15-foot drop near the trail, since I hadn't found a good U-turn clearing yet and wasn't about to keep driving towards the deer or whatever this thing was. It was a tight turn, but I made it, and I floored it as fast as the four-wheeler could go. It was still absolutely silent during this time, and I've never heard silence quite like that. My father is a sound engineer. He has a home studio and a studio that has, like, dead boxes or whatever, that you can sing in that have no noise from the soundproofing. That's the closest thing that I can explain the silence to being. It was that quiet, in the woods, mind you, where it was alive with noise only moments ago. In any case, I floored the four-wheeler to go as fast as I could back up the mountain, around the bends, and get out of there as fast as I could, not worrying about the danger that I was putting myself in driving so fast near some of the sketchy parts of the trail that I was on. Eventually, I got on a flat, straight path, and around this time I was about maybe halfway back to the entrance of the trail, I would estimate, and I started to see animals, deer, birds. I saw a black bear too, the only one that I'd ever seen in my life, all sitting or sort of standing near the trail. Not like right next to it, but maybe about 15 to 20 feet back in the woods amongst the trees, just staring at me. All these wild animals, including the birds in the trees, all silent, not moving and just staring at me. Only their heads moving, following me with their eyes while I left as fast as I could. These animals, too, were not making a sound. I still couldn't hear the wind either. The birds that were up in the trees were just looking at me, all watching me silently. I'll never forget the feeling of their eyes burning into my back once I passed them all. It was a terrifying feeling, the eeriest feeling of my life, in fact, I think. I kept going, though, as fast as I could. The sun was getting close to setting now, but it was still plenty light out, thankfully. It was about an hour from setting, I'd say, but I just kept going. I remember going past areas that I didn't really recognize at all. I could have sworn, too, that I was on a new trail or had taken a wrong turn or something, but I knew that that was impossible because this trail had no turn-off. It was just a single-road trail, a one-way or whatever. But the surroundings were 100% not the same as on my way back in. And because of this, I started to freak out. I tried reminding myself, though, that it wasn't possible since it was a one-way trail, and so I just kept going. I remember passing a huge tree that had moss all over it, and this massive tree, like something out of a fantasy movie, a tree that I would have 100% noticed on the way in when I was originally coming onto the trail, and now here it was. Terrain and trees with moss that I had never seen or noticed before. I also didn't see any four-wheeler tracks that really should have been there, but for some reason were blown over and no longer there. I can remember the fear that I was on the wrong trail, but I knew being a one-way that should have been impossible, so I just kept going. I mean, I wasn't about to turn around to see if I missed a turn off somehow or anything. Eventually, though, I came to an area that suddenly looked normal and I could see my tracks again from where I came in, which means that somehow there was a part of the trail that I had passed through that had changed scenery and removed my four-wheeler tracks. I have no idea how this is or was even possible. To be honest, I really don't like to think about it much. Also, I kept seeing animals on occasion just sitting back from the trail, staring at me from time to time. Shortly after getting back on the normal trail or whatever, I remember hearing the wind pick up and start to speak to me in that foreign language that I mentioned earlier. I've never heard wind like this before or since, and I've been in the woods when it's windy a fair amount of the time. It was otherworldly, though. I don't know. Thinking about it now still terrifies me. But this time it sounded less ominous, I guess, and more friendly. I know that's weird to say, but as if it was encouraging me to keep going, and I was doing the right thing by leaving, as if it was no longer angry at me for my intrusion. I eventually got to the entrance of the trail, which was a two-way. It was a sort of Y-shaped trail. The right side was the side that I took. The left side was another trail that was also a one-way but in a different direction. And the tail of the Y was the way back home onto the highway. I remember as I pulled off onto the shoulder of the highway from the trail, everything went silent once again. That dead silence that I was talking about was suddenly back. I turned back and I saw that same deer, or whatever it was, standing there. But this time it was moving, stomping its foot and raising or lowering its head like a horse shaking off flies. The wind blew once again, and I felt like it said again. It never made any understandable words or anything, but never return or something like that. Then it walked into the trees and out of sight. Once out of sight, maybe a few seconds later, I began to hear the birds sing. The normal noises of the forest returned, and everything returned to the expected normal of the woods. I just sat there staring back from where I had come into the woods, feeling absolutely relieved to be out of there, but also feeling like I had no idea what had just happened, or how even to pass it out in my own mind. I was shaking and barely able to keep my thumb on the gas trigger on the four-wheeler as I peeled out onto the shoulder of the highway to finally get back home. I just got back into the highway and started to gun it about a mile or two up the road to my grandparents' driveway. On the way there, I passed a local on his gator, a type of four-wheeler with a trunk thing on the back, more for farm work than fun, and he waved at me. And maybe it was just me already being creeped out, but he had this sort of look, like he knew what I had just seen, like he was sort of in on it, I guess. But I just kept going. It was probably just my imagination making a friendly stranger more than what he was, and I just waved back and I motored on. Now, all I know is that I will never be going back into the Ozarks, or any mountains for that matter, for pretty much as long as I live, I think. I know that people may think that I'm lying or trying to make up a story, I went crazy temporarily or whatever, but I know what I saw. I have no idea what it meant or what it was about, but whatever it was, it didn't want me there or wasn't where I should have been or whatever. So I will never return to those mountains ever again. Again, I don't know what I saw, I don't know what happened. I'm open to the idea that I had a hallucination, as that makes far more sense than what I saw being real. But I just don't feel that that is what happened. Then again, how would I really know, I guess? It drives me insane trying to figure this out, and I guess I'll never really know. Maybe I just need to chalk this up to another weird story of being out in the woods that people hear. But I'll tell you one thing. I definitely take weird stories people say that they've heard or seen in the woods a little bit more seriously these days. All I can say is that while it all sounds insane, looking back on it, I never felt in danger, I guess. I never felt as if this animal wanted to hurt me, simply scare me off. As if I was somewhere I shouldn't have been and they were doing me a favor by leading me back home to civilization. I am curious, though, if anybody listening to this has had any similar experiences in the Ozarks or mountains in general. I just had to get this out somewhere, at least where nobody knows who I am, so that if I am called a liar or a schizophrenic or a creepypasta maker, at least it's anonymous, right? But in any case, there's my story, or whatever you may think of it. I live a normal life these days. I'm in college, doing well, and have an apartment with a buddy, and I have a girlfriend, a job. I'm very happy, enjoying life, and most of the time I'm just an average guy like everybody else. But sometimes this whole thing pops up in my mind, and I remember, or I have a dream, and it all comes back. An experience that I'll never forget, but quite honestly wish that I could. Anyway, if anyone has been in this area and had anything similar happen, then I would love to hear it. It would make me feel better to know that I'm not the only one. I've Googled some and haven't found anything similar to this experience that I considered credible, I guess, but like I said, if you have a story, then I would love to hear it. We were at a Sportsman warehouse in Colorado with our parents. I was 14 and my little brother was 12. We were on a trip to see family, so we were about done walking around and decided to sit down in the camping chair aisle while we were waiting for our parents to be done shopping. While we were sitting there, a lady that looked cracked up on some sort of drug walked up to us and started asking us some weird questions. She asked us where the Colorado River was. "Can you show me on the map in the front where the Colorado River is?" There was a map of the US in the front of the store right by the entrance. She kept telling us to walk up there with her because she needed help finding the Colorado River on it. We both were weirded out by this and started to walk and find our parents. She kept following us and didn't stop. We found our parents and I told them what happened. My mum started yelling at this lady, but she wasn't going away even after that. We checked out and started leaving the store, and when we walked out, we saw the creepy lady and 3 or 4 men run out of the store and near a van that was hidden out of any camera's view. 2 of the men were waiting outside of the store, and that's when I realized what was happening. The lady wanted my little brother to go to the front of the store so that the 2 men could abduct him and run to the van. I am so glad that we followed our instincts that day and we didn't follow the lady. To this day, I'm very cautious when I go into town, especially because I live on the border of Mexico and Arizona. I guess the moral of the story here too is that you need to be careful when you talk to strangers. Even if you are an adult, you just never know how many people may be in on an abduction. This happened not too long after I moved to England. Back then, and still to this day, my country's living conditions weren't great, with everything getting worse every year, low salaries and high cost of living, so I decided that I'd had enough. Not too long before that, my best friend had moved to England with her boyfriend and her dog. They lived in a house with a spare room, so we planned it out, and I moved to their house and shared the rent while I tried to find a job in my own place. We didn't last too long in that house, though, and 2 weeks after I moved in, we moved into a different house. The house itself was supposed to be better, but the neighborhood that it was in, well, let's just say that it had a lot to improve on. The problem, though, was that my friends had the dog, and most nights they would get into huge fights about who was the most tired from work, who worked the hardest, who did the most at home, and other nonsense that I didn't have the patience for. So I would end up offering to take the dog for his walk, just so that I didn't have to listen to them anymore. It would usually go pretty well, I think especially because this was around the pandemic time, so there were a lot less people on the street. One night, though, was different. When I offered to take the dog and walked out of the house with him, I had this strange feeling going on, like that night I shouldn't have offered to go and should have just stayed at home. Then again, maybe it's best that it was me and not my friend. Back then I was 25 going on 26, well-built and broad-shouldered and could easily take a fight, even though I'm not a very tall guy, so would probably present a bigger threat than my friend. In any case, I went down the stairs, walked out of the building with a trash bag in hand, dumped the bag and went on my way to the clothes entrance. As always, when I got to the main road, because I like to keep the walks different and fresh for the dog, I looked both ways to decide which way to go. That's when, to my left, I noticed this guy jogging in my direction. What troubled me, though, is that he was jogging in completely normal day-to-day clothes, not dressed to go out for a run at all. Thinking that I didn't want to be judging people and didn't want to be feeling uneasy, I decided to just walk the other way and try to ignore the guy running my way. If it was the case, I would cross the road and see what happened. I wasn't the only one feeling uncomfortable, though, as the dog was refusing to just go about our way. He was an intense dog with a massive focus when it came to trouble and was a mix between a bulldog and a Portuguese hunting dog breed. So he was medium-sized, muscular, and had the habit of staring people down in a way that would make everyone feel uncomfortable. And that's just what he did then. I turned to my right, started walking down the street, having to pull the dog along every 5 seconds because he wouldn't stop turning around and observing this guy, who was still about 30 seconds jogging away from us. Of course, I kept my eye on this guy as well, taking advantage of having to pull the dog along to keep measuring how far the guy was from us, and when he was starting to get too close for comfort, I decided to cross the street. If he was just running past, he would be on his way. If there was something else happening, he would cross the street as well. And of course, that's exactly what happened. When I started crossing the street, the guy crossed it behind me. And then I decided to actually stop and let the dog stare the guy down to see what would come out of this. It was like I had messed everything up for him too. He looked sort of surprised, stopped running and walked past us with both me and the dog eyeing him. He then lifted his hands like he was surrendering and said, "Hey bro, all good?" To which I replied, "All good? You?" "Yeah boss, yeah," he said. Then he walked ahead of us and finished crossing the road, and I went back to the same side of the road that I was on to begin with, and thought that that would be it. No trouble, just a slight misunderstanding, I guess. That's when the guy stopped, turned around, saw that I was not on his side of the road anymore, and did the weirdest thing. He took 2 steps back up the road and hid behind a tree like he was hiding from somebody else that was ahead on the street. This made me even more uncomfortable, and I was now having to control my shaking legs, adrenaline and increasing heartbeat, and not let any signals give my discomfort away. I ignored it, kept walking ahead, walking past the guy on the opposite side of the road, looked him in the eye again to warn him without having to say anything, and kept walking. 10 more steps was all it took. With this weird guy behind me, I heard something shuffle ahead on the street. Initially I thought this could be a fox, but stopped when I decided the shuffling sounded like it was coming from something way bigger than a fox or a dog. Another person, maybe. Then I saw it. There was somebody else hiding behind one of the upcoming houses' trash cans, waiting for me to get there. I could see a part of their back showing up from one of the sides. I don't know if me and the dog could have taken them on or not, but I decided then that I wouldn't risk it for me, let alone risk the dog's life. I turned around and started walking up the street again, walked past the guy, walked past the first guy who was still huddled behind the same tree, nodded at him and said goodnight and left. The surprise in his face confirmed everything to me. They were not expecting me to understand what was going on, were not expecting me to turn around and simply walk away, and the first guy was not expecting me to still interact with him at all. For the night, I decided to just let the dog do his business in the little grass area behind our building, and that was it. Now, considering that this was a very dangerous and high-crime neighborhood, which keeps getting worse, and a month later, my boss's son and his friend were mugged at knife point with a machete just up the road from where this happened. Honestly, I think that I made the right choice that night. I was a very odd child. I always liked weird things and the unknown, so I dabbled like a moron, and as we all know, when you go looking, something comes looking for you. I was about 13 years old, living in an apartment building with my mother and stepfather. I've always had insomnia too, and one evening I was tossing and turning when suddenly I just felt what I can only describe as dread. I was absolutely terrified. I had no lights on as I was trying to fall asleep. In this bedroom, I had double sliding mirrors facing my bed. I didn't know any better. But finally, I summoned up the courage to open my eyes and roll over. When I did, I stopped breathing. Standing next to my bed, facing the wall and looking outside, was a girl, roughly the same age, with long black hair and a soft pink polka-dotted nightgown, just staring at the wall, not moving, not breathing. I stared at her for what felt like hours, but was maybe just moments. Then I hid under my covers. It was probably about 15 minutes before the dread passed, and when I finally opened my eyes and peeked again, she was gone. This was the first and last time that I ever saw her. I would always get home first, as my mum and stepdad are police officers, so I was always alone. The apartment sometimes would just feel so heavy too. My computer desk faced a wall and my back would be towards all the doors. These doors would creak and move all the time, which was whatever, but one day I was on my webcam and I looked, and in the door to my parents' room, there was a black mass standing there just existing. I, of course, panicked and looked behind me to find nothing. Things like this continued to happen to me throughout living there too. Fast forward 2 years though, I'm now living at my stepmother's home. I was taking care of her during her stage 5 breast cancer, so I'd often be home alone while she was in the hospital undergoing treatment. One day, I'm sitting in the living room watching TV, and from the corner of my eye, I see roughly 4 people in my yard walking up to my porch. I was weirded out as we lived in pretty much the middle of nowhere, but my stepmom has so many friends that it wouldn't have been too strange for someone to come and visit. I wait and wait for a knock. Nothing. So I go and open the door and nothing. No one is there. I go and look around the property and the gate. Nobody's there either. I just ended up ignoring this and went about my days. But maybe a month or so later, I'm downstairs again with Sky, our beautiful massive GSD, just watching TV. Suddenly, we hear a slam from upstairs. It sounded like somebody fell, got up, and then fell again. I was there alone with just the dog, but the dog was with me. It took me a good 30 minutes to go upstairs and look. I was scared, obviously, and Sky was scared as well. I wasn't going up there without her, and she was refusing to go up there at first. I checked my stepmom's room, and everything was normal, so I go about checking all the rooms. I finally get to my room, and when I get there, it is absolutely destroyed. My clothes were everywhere, my bed was disheveled, and a dog kennel that I had in there had the door ripped off. It was sat neatly next to the kennel itself. Needless to say, Sky and we slept downstairs that night. After that incident, things seemed to die down a bit though, and I'd mainly just see shadows from my eyes darting around and shadow people walking with me. At 15 to 16 years old, I got really into the supernatural at one point, so I started opening my mind, trying to connect to things and see what this was all about and what was all out there. This was fine and dandy, nothing too odd for a good while, just more of the same shadow people, door slamming behind me, my iPod randomly taking photos, random stuff like this. And well, around this time I met my first boyfriend. Somehow I was allowed to stay at this boyfriend's home with him and his parents on weekends and such. My boyfriend and his brother were huge into paranormal stuff as well. His brother dabbled in some very dark and wicked things actually. But one night, my boyfriend, his brother, and I are at the house alone, just talking and hanging out, and I'm looking outside, when all of a sudden, a broom just gets yeeted across the porch. I stop and say, "What was that?" Of course, they're giddy and excited, but I wasn't. I had an odd feeling, to be honest. Later that night, we had gone over to a friend's house who lived up the street, and we drank and smoked and did all the teenager stuff. As we're walking home, I see something in the distance. It's right out in front of my boyfriend's house, and this thing, from where we were standing, honestly looked a bit like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. I freak out and shout, "What is that?" and point. This creature-like thing squat-walked in front of my boyfriend's car and just never came out. I was petrified. I didn't want to walk past the car, but I also was afraid to let him go ahead and me become engulfed by the forest and darkness that we were walking in now. We made it past the car eventually, and nothing. At this point, I'm done though. I'm scared and I just want to go to sleep. My boyfriend didn't want to sleep though, so he and his brother went outside to smoke and be boys. Maybe about 2 hours later, I hear my boyfriend say my name. Why are the lights out? I'm lost. Then a moment later, I heard him say, "Open the door, it's dark out here." I got up from bed, went to open the door, and froze. I froze my hand inches from the doorknob. Something just told me, no, don't do it. Do not open that door. So I did what anyone would do, and I just hid under the blankets crying. Another hour passes, and my boyfriend finally comes in. I asked him if he asked me to open the door and if he really got lost in his own home. And he looked at me like I honestly had 3 heads and told me I've been outside since I first came in. That was the most significant thing that happened in that home. The energy was always focused in the kitchen though, and I'd often hear someone say help from the pantry, but I always ignored it. More years passed and I decided enough was enough, so I closed my mind off at this point. This worked for a while too until I moved to another state. I moved in with my sister. Everything was okay for a week or two, but one morning I was getting ready for work and I heard a crash coming from my sister's room. I was alone again. I went into her room to see what it was, and she had a clock on the floor that she was fixing. It was leaning against the wall, no batteries, one hand missing, and the remaining hand was violently spinning. At this point, I'm in my 20s and I just left. I slammed the door and I just go back to business. Then one day, she opens up to me about some weird things that have been happening around the house. So I suggest that we set up some cameras and, man, it did not disappoint. We caught a hand appearing and disappearing on her couch, as if it was changing the TV channel. Then we caught the couch being hit, the computer flashing on and then immediately shutting off, and something falling in the laundry room. This activity eventually calmed down as I told her that we need to stop and do something about it. Another year passes and I got my first house. Everything seemed great, no bad vibes or anything. For the first few months of living there, everything was good. Then one day, I'm sitting in my living room and I hear voices in my basement. I just said nope, and I didn't check. Instead, I got a security system installed on all doors and windows, with cameras watching the outside. And while I was working one day, I got an influx of alerts. Garage door open, garage door shut, master bedroom window open, pool door open. I got home really quickly. I didn't call the police immediately. I didn't want them in my home without me there since I have guard dogs. I cleared the house and everything was fine as far as I could tell. Nobody was there. I'm a bit shaken, but eventually I forget about it. Until a few days later when the same thing happens. I did the same thing, rushed home, checked everything, and cleared the house. So then I had this terrifying thought, what if I have a voyeur? So I bought cameras and installed them in every room, but I didn't see a single thing. The sensors still went off, so I called the company and they checked if something was wrong. But no, everything was working just fine. Everything calms down eventually until one day, while I'm trimming my dog's nails, I hear thundering footsteps rushing towards me from behind. I didn't have time to react before I felt an icy chill in my neck. I looked around scared as if I was about to be murdered, but there was nothing there again. So I got up at this point, told whatever it was to get lost, and slammed my door. A few nights later, I'm watching TV in the living room, and in my kitchen I see a black mass peeking from around a good foot above my cabinets. When I fully look, There was nothing there, so we did a song and a dance of this for a good while, and it got to the point where, I don't know, I just sort of got used to it, I think. I didn't have bad vibes, so I just ignored it. Then I had to leave my home for about 2 weeks. When I came back, all of my pictures had been knocked off the walls, even in the dining room. If I hadn't have had to unlock my doors, I honestly would have thought that it was broken into. So I just simply apologized to whatever is there, that I'm sorry I left, but I had to. I'm home now. Everything was good for a while until one night, I was woken up. I'm in pure terror. Something is definitely in my room and I can feel it. It's a horrific energy. I didn't dare look. I kept my eyes closed the entire time. That was maybe a month or so ago now, and I haven't experienced anything since. Obviously, I have many more stories, but these are the ones that pop out to me the most. If anyone has any thoughts on what this could be, or if it's something that's attached to me, and what I should do about it, please do let me know. I was 17 when this happened. I had an early morning shift in a restaurant, and I used a bus to get there every day. When I got to my bus stop, someone was already there, and that was strange because it was so early in the morning. Anyway, I started to walk to my workplace just to notice that the man had started to follow me. Seeing the man following me had me a little bit scared, and I started to run at one point. There was so much off with this guy. Like the whole time he looked at the ground, but also started to run when he saw me running. I quickly ran to the back doors, saw him coming in the same direction. When I closed the doors, he was maybe just a couple of meters away from me, and I saw, too, that he tried to open that locked door after me. When I was panicking inside of the restaurant, my co-workers came to me and said that someone is trying all the windows to get in. We called the cops, and later they told us that they found the guy, and he was carrying a tiny saw with him. Sometimes I think about what he would have done if he would have been just a little bit quicker than me. So I drove out to my grandpa's barn the other day to grab my brother's wallet. He'd left it there by accident. This was at about 9 p.m, I would guess. And while I was grabbing my brother's wallet, I just had a feeling like I was being watched. A bit of detail too. About a mile between my house and the barn is a culvert. It's before a large hill with a curve about halfway through. You have to slow down to avoid a possible accident. I slowed down to a crawl on this back road, and when I did, there were these two kids on the road. Now, I try to be a good-natured redneck, so I stopped to see what they were doing and if they needed help. I had heard these stories growing up about weird stuff happening on this road. Everything from ghost lights to even a woman who apparently asks for a ride and screams if you say yes before disappearing. But this was different. I stopped and asked these kids if they were okay. I mean, it's summer and maybe they'd been out riding four-wheelers or something and they got wrecked or broke down or whatever. But one kid asked for a ride, but his voice was just, I don't know, weird, too calm, and he didn't make eye contact either. I looked at the other. I live in the deep south where the mosquito is the state bird, and the other kid was just covered in mosquitoes, didn't swat them or anything. So I finally asked him, "Why are you looking down like that, man?" He then looks up, and I swear to you that his eyes were black as coal. I stomped the gas as hard as I could, soaring up the hill, barely making the curve. They both stared at me as I zipped up the road, flinging gravel and dust everywhere. I got out of there as quickly as I could, and I didn't sleep very well that night. I, a 20-year-old female, recently moved into a new apartment with my boyfriend, who works away for long periods of time. An older man, 50, started to become friendly with me, knowing that I was new to the complex. I made the mistake of telling him that I live with my partner, but he's away for work for a while. Almost every day after that, he came knocking on my door and waited to see if I didn't answer. He would leave after 5 minutes of knocking with no answer. One time I was out in the common grass area playing with my brother, he's 2, that I would occasionally have over. I saw him coming my way and quickly picked up my brother. The man started making conversation, asking about my brother, and literally tried to grab him out of my arms. I held onto my brother tightly and pulled away, and as he started to cry, I made an excuse that I have to go and feed him, and walked away. That was the last time that I went near that man with my brother. I'm extremely bad with confrontation, as you can probably tell, but still, something just didn't feel right. A few days later, I heard a knock at my door and opened it without thinking, and he walked straight past me into my apartment without even saying a single word, just smiling. I asked him if he was doing okay, and he said, "Oh, I'm good, I just wanted to see what your place looked like from the inside," and started walking into every room. He checked all my windows and commented, "Huh, so all your windows have bars on them except the bathroom?" I nervously laughed and said, "Yeah, I guess they do." I really didn't know what to do at this point, so I walked out into the front garden hoping that he would follow me out of the apartment to try and talk to me. I just wanted him out, but was too scared to anger him. I could tell that he didn't seem like he was right in his head or whatever, but once he came out of the front, I closed my door and said, "I have to go to the shop now, sorry, it's going to be closed soon," and walked off. Now that night, while hanging my washing out, another neighbor introduced herself, 34 female. I told her what happened and asked if she knew the man. Apparently, he had been doing the exact same things to her as well. She told her partner that this creepy neighbor was doing the same things to a young girl, me, and that this was the last straw, and he ended up going and talking to the older man. After that, the older man only tried one more time that I know of to knock on my door, which I hid in my kitchen for 10 minutes until he left. I haven't heard anything since then and haven't seen him around, but I wake up at night panicking sometimes, thinking that he's planning on doing something to me. My windows are glass, so there's no way that I can even put a lock on it. I talked to management and there's nothing that they can do since he stopped now, apparently. I'm thinking of possibly filing a report with the police, so it's at least on record, but again, there's really not much that anyone can do, I guess. Here's hoping that this doesn't escalate any further. Every person that has ever been close to me has seen or had a conversation with me when I wasn't around, at least once. This started happening around the time that I turned 13. I had an early day at school and decided to hang out at a friend's house instead of catching the bus home. Stayed for a few hours and I walked home. When I got into the house though, I heard my mum speaking to someone upstairs, which was unusual since we were normally the only 2 people that were there at any given time. When I turned the corner to see what was going on, I saw her looking into the open door of my room and heard her having a conversation. Obviously confused, I asked who was over, at which point she nearly jumped out of her skin, turned around, and got white as a ghost. At the time, she told me that she was on the phone, but later confessed that she thought that I had been home since school got out and was trying to wake me up from a nap. A few years later, I got into my first serious relationship. After a few months of dating each other, I had moved into my first apartment with a few close friends. And one night, while she was staying over, I was awoken and saw that she was crying. When I asked her what was wrong, she told me that she had gotten up to use the bathroom. When she came out, she saw me walking down the hallway and towards the stairs, assuming that I had just woken up from her getting out of bed and went to get a glass of water or something. she didn't think anything of it, until she turned the corner and saw me laying in the same spot that I was in, completely asleep. Not long after that, my roommates also started having similar experiences, usually at night. This has since continued throughout every relationship and close friendship that I've acquired, to the point where it's become something that I have to disclose while also trying to sound sane, which is not always easy. The most troubling and confusing part about all of this, though, is that I've never personally experienced it, and the only time that I'm aware that it's happened is when I'm comforting someone from whatever it is that they actually saw. So I was 7 years old, Spencerville, Indiana. It was the middle of fall, chilly night. I had just gotten inside from stacking hay, up to about 9 p.m. I got cleaned up and changed, so I went to grab some leftovers, when I heard a knock on the door of the outside covered porch, and went to check who it was. When I got there were 2 children with black eyes, black as night. I originally thought that it was just too dark to see the colors at first, and they asked if they could come in for a second and use the phone. I had never seen them before, as I knew every kid in my little town. I asked them to wait while I go and get my grandpa. He went out and I heard him say something, but I couldn't hear him. When he came back in, he looked white as a ghost and told me to go to bed. I started to argue with him about my food that I wanted to eat, and he just screamed at me like he had never done before. I never knew anything about black-eyed children until the last year, and I remembered this, and man, did it send chills down my body. So I don't typically believe in this kind of stuff, but I had a strange encounter a while back that I was telling my coworker about, and they insisted that what I saw was a rake. I've been doing some research since I had no idea what it was, and I gotta say that it looks very similar to what I saw. So, I was driving home from work at like 1:30 in the morning, about 2 months ago, and was heading down this typically busy side street. Except since it was late, there wasn't a lot of traffic, just a Jeep in front of me. As I was driving around a bend in the road, I saw on my peripheral this figure to my right by the sidewalk, standing between 2 small trees, held up by wire supports. This creature was standing kind of behind them, I guess. At first, I thought it was just a big slender dog, like a white greyhound or Great Dane that escaped and seemed to be standing and barking at traffic by the sidewalk. I only noticed it as I began to pass it, but as I passed it, I quickly noticed that it appeared to have a humanoid-shaped head with black eyes, a hunched back posterior, and a long stretched mouth like it was screaming. I was going maybe 45 miles per hour when I passed it, and it was dark out. I thought to myself, what was that? So I slowed down quickly to look back, and in my mirror, I saw the creature turn around and run towards a wooden fence. But as it ran, I saw just how tall and slender the creature was. It seemed pale with a sort of anorexic appearance. It moved strangely, and its leg joints were inverted and bent in the opposite direction. At that point, I was obviously seriously creeped out. The Jeep in front of me also slowed down, so I can only assume that they saw it too. We both kept driving as it was late and couldn't stop in the middle of the road, but that situation really made my skin crawl. I kept checking my mirrors for the rest of the drive home and debating if I should have called a non-emergency line to have an officer check it out. But I told myself that they would think that I'm just an idiot and that they wouldn't believe me. These days, every night when I take that road, I look around to see if I can spot it again. I really want to believe that it was just a dog, but I can't stop thinking about how strangely it moved with its backwards knees. I haven't talked about this much except to my coworker because, quite frankly, I know it sounds ridiculous. I'm just wondering, though, what the heck I actually saw, and if it's something that I should even be talking about, or if I should continue to pretend like I never saw anything and just move on with my life. It was a normal day, and I was playing with my dog outside, named Harley. She was an English bulldog that was as friendly could be. My aunt called me in for bed. I was sad because I was having fun with my dog playing tug-of-war, but I went inside and laid down on my bed. My uncle came to my room. He gave me a hug and he tucked me in. At least an hour later, I put the Goofy movie into my VHS player, and all of a sudden I had a really weird feeling. Not like I was being watched or like I was dreaming. It was a feeling of familiarity, like I was in the presence of somebody that I knew. I didn't feel scared. I looked up and there he was, at least 6'4" to 6'6", wearing a long trench coat that went all the way to the ground and a broad-brimmed hat. Whatever I was seeing was completely black, darker than the dark room that I was in, and completely featureless. When I saw it, I wasn't scared or paralyzed. I guess I was more curious, and I honestly felt safe and like it was friendly, so I said hello and snapped my fingers just to make sure that I was awake. I looked at him for at least 10 minutes before I waved at him. As soon as I wave at him, he's gone as fast as he had appeared. I lay in bed completely stunned by what the heck just happened. I went back to watching the Goofy movie and I had an entirely normal night after that. Nothing else was strange or out of the ordinary. The weirdest thing was that I wasn't scared by this shadow figure. Instead, I felt a strange sense of calmness and curiosity, as if I had encountered a long-lost friend. It was as if the presence of the shadow figure had somehow reassured me rather than instilling fear. I really have no idea what this thing was. It was very similar to the description of the Hat Man, but I could tell that I wasn't being threatened by this presence. The shadow figure seemed to be observing me from a distance almost as if it was studying my every move. The encounter with the shadow figure left me with a lingering sense of curiosity, and it's as if that brief interaction held a hidden meaning or purpose that I may never fully comprehend. Despite not seeing him again, the memory of that enigmatic presence continues to puzzle and fascinate me. In my job, I visit care homes for reviews with residents. I spend most of my day in and out of the places for at least a couple of hours at a time, to spending at least a day there at times as well. I've gotten pretty used to the routine now, but I have had one strange thing once before where my case died. I was in the care home the next week visiting another case. The staff said that the first man's buzzer hadn't stopped going off at night since he died. It had never malfunctioned until then. He was still empty. There's also a basement room in another home where I have to go to look at files and whatnot. And something happens in that room the moment that you enter. You become sleepy and lethargic, and when you leave, you wake back up again and go back to normal. Everything just feels very heavy, and it's not just me. I asked around the office, and other people have felt it too. Today at work, I was in a larger than usual home. I'm sat in the nurse station looking through files, and two people walk in. It was a woman and a man. I don't look up from my files, but I see them in my side vision, sort of. The woman is a staff nurse. She enters first, and the man follows her closely. She crosses the room behind me, reaches for the paperwork on one side of me. She then goes to the other side of me and sits down. As she sits down, I become very conscious that the man is on my first side where she's first retrieved her paperwork. He's still in my side vision. Big burly guy with brown hair and hands on his hips, wearing blue scrubs. He's facing at me, and the nurse and I can feel him staring down at me. I sort of instinctively feel like I'm squashed between two people. It's a small office, so you know when you don't get much personal space, how you sort of get an ick feeling. It was a bit like that. I look up to ask if he needs anything, and when I do, he's just gone. No one has left the room, mind you. There was no way that it was a person that walked away. He just disappeared in not even the blink of an eye as soon as I moved my head. Also, the blue scrubs, they aren't even any of the care home uniforms, but I guess that just didn't occur to me until, well, much later. The house that I would consider to be my childhood home is the one where I lived from age 3 to 20. There are so many stories that I could tell from living in that house, but today I'll focus on two. One happened when I was about 7, and the other happened when I was around 13. When I was 7, I shared a room with my younger sister. We had a bunk bed, and I was on the top bunk. We slept with our door open because both of us were scared of the dark, and the lamp in the hall was always on. Now, I've always been a pretty light sleeper. If someone were walking down the hall, I would always wake up. And this particular night, I was sleeping with my back to the room. I remember being scared awake because I felt someone rub my back and pull the blanket up over my shoulders. I thought that it was odd because I hadn't woken up to my parents walking down the hall to my room. I brushed it off, kept my back to the room, and I just went back to sleep. The next morning, I asked my younger sister if Mum or Dad had come into the room last night, and she said that she didn't hear anyone. So, being the curious kid I am, I asked both my parents if they had come into my room at any point last night. They told me that they hadn't because they were feeling under the weather and went to bed not long after my sister and I laid down. I remember hearing them talking and their door opening and closing right after we laid down, in fact. So, after my investigation, I've decided that there was a ghost in that house that was watching after my sister and I. I may have woken up afraid because I was caught off guard, but I felt an overwhelming sense of peace immediately after the fear subsided. Maybe that's why I didn't bother turning around that night. Anyway, so at 13, it was very different though. I had graduated to having my own room and was no longer in a bunk. I slept with my door closed and also a bit heavier now. Still pretty light, but I didn't wake up every time someone opened a door in the house, is what I'm getting at. It was around 2 a.m. and I woke up because I think I needed to pee really bad. I get up and walk to the door, but hesitate with opening it. There was just a sense of dread at what might be on the other side all of a sudden. Eventually, my bladder won that fight, as it normally does, and I open the door slowly. I peek out and don't see anything, so I run to the bathroom. After I finish, though, the same dreaded feeling happened when I went to open the bathroom door. Again, I peeked out to see nothing, and in the end, I just made a run for my room. I make it to my room and immediately jump under the blankets. I settle down after being panicked for a bit and roll over onto my stomach with my head facing the wall. I'm on the verge of sleeping now when I felt something whack my lower back like I've never experienced. Of course, my immediate reaction was to jump up and turn around to yell at my sister. She had gotten into the habit of pranking me by now. I turn, but I don't see anyone there. So I get out of bed and I check around to make sure that she wasn't hiding anywhere. Once I check the room and see that she's not anywhere in it, I suddenly become very scared. I run to the door and fling it open. The dread of staying in that room was just way more than that of the door from earlier. I go into my sister's room and, sure enough, she's passed out on her bed. I decide then that I'm sleeping in her room. Once I told her what happened, she rolls her eyes but lets me in bed with her. She just doesn't believe anything that doesn't personally happen to her. I didn't experience anything else that night, thankfully, but it was scary enough to remember it, even years later. Now, I'm really not sure if the same, well, whatever that was, is involved with both stories. I never experienced the tucking in again, but had plenty of times being scared. I wonder if we did something to make the ghost or whatever it was angry and it went from being kind to being threatening. I say we because my sister and I have some shared stories. Maybe there are two different things there and the scary one became the dominant one or something. I really can't say, and I wish I had more answers, but whatever the case, I was happy when we left that house. This happened in New York City. Years ago when I was a freshman in college, I was out partying one night with some friends. I wasn't drunk or on any hard drugs or anything, but I definitely smoked a blunt or two. At around 3 a.m. we went our separate ways, and I got off the train and began walking home. I had to take a longer route home that night, because some train lines were under maintenance. When I got off the train, I realized that I had to walk past the cemetery, and I started to feel a bit uneasy about that, but I wasn't afraid for any real reason. It was just sort of like, cemetery is spooky sort of thing. In any case, about 10 blocks and I'm home. I always saw trucks lined up on the cemetery blocks too, and being that it was a desolate area, I assumed truckers would park their trucks by the cemetery to take naps or sleep before continuing their routes. Back then, I really didn't think too much of it. A few minutes after getting off the train, I heard a faint sound of what I guessed was a car or a truck door being shut behind me. I turned around and I didn't see anything. I scanned my surroundings once quickly and didn't see any other people. Not ahead of me or behind me for as far as I could see anyway. I kept walking, this time a bit faster, and about a minute later I hear footsteps behind me. I turned really quickly and I saw a man walking fast a few feet behind me. When he saw me turn, he began catcalling me by making kissing noises too. I was used to these catcalls, especially living in New York City. By my house, there would actually be a line of men on the corner every morning, waiting to be picked up for construction work, and every time I passed them to go to the store, I would get catcalled and a little bit harassed. So for the most part, I just ignored him like I always did, and I kept walking, but definitely faster this time. A few seconds later, he was running to catch up with me though, and he was now at my side speaking to me in Spanish, which I don't speak. He grabbed my arm tightly and began pulling me toward him. When I started screaming and fighting him off, he pushed me up against the cemetery fence, and in the midst of this, my heart sunk to the floor as I thought that I was about to be assaulted, or perhaps worse. Seconds later, he had me off my feet by both arms, but then I noticed his face turned completely white in the moonlight. It was a face of pure horror as he seemed to be looking past me into the cemetery, fixated on something. He let out a blood-curdling scream and he let me go. As I dropped to the ground and looked up, he was already across the street and running out of sight. Choking on tears, shaking beside myself, I picked myself up and I ran as fast as the last few blocks to my house as I could. I didn't turn to look inside that cemetery once. I did not turn around at all, in fact. I didn't stop until I was home. To this day, I really don't know what happened that night, and it's always perplexed me. I never took that train again or walked past that cemetery either, and to be honest, I never told my parents to, and only told a handful of friends over the years, because to this day, like I said, I still don't understand what actually happened. But what I do know is that something probably saved my life that night. So, I've been stressed the past few weeks. My mind is in deep thought over what happened during winter last year. I'm no stranger to hearing or seeing things too. Of course, I never felt a reason to tell anyone my experiences because there's always uncertainty behind what is seen or heard. A what if you will. Anyway, I'm from Texas, and at the time I lived inside a house that had no central cooling, with the temperature of the house being the outside temp or close to it most of the time. during last winter. It had been freezing outside. The weeks before that day, I kept hearing what sounded like someone calling my name throughout the house whenever no one was home, though. It was subtle, so I didn't think too much of it, always thinking that maybe I was just hearing things. My parents had just left the store for the groceries that day, while I felt a little uncomfortable being alone due to hearing a voice calling my name. But at the time, I thought, what's the worst that could happen? I hear my voice being called. I'll go and look, see nothing, and watch the TV. Simple, I thought. So they left the house, and the house temperature felt extremely cold that day. So I laid back on the recliner that we had and put on a classic movie, covered myself in a blanket while wearing pajamas and a sweater, comfortable as I could get. I remember feeling sleepy after getting comfortable, but then it happened. I heard a guy's voice call my name. I pumped myself up. I said, "Let's do this." Got up, walked around the house. It's daylight outside, by the way, snowing too. It saw nothing like I expected. However, how could I get comfortable again, knowing once I relaxed that I would hear something again? We've all seen the movies where the person relaxes and thinks, I can let my guard down again, then everything goes downhill, right? So I made a deal with myself. I'll record myself sleeping. Either nothing will happen and I'll fall asleep, or I'll finally record it to show my parents that I'm not crazy. It's a win-win deal. Sadly, the outcome was what I hoped wouldn't happen. I put my phone onto a table that's used for drinks near the recliner, set it to record myself on the couch, slowly drifting off into sleep, thinking nothing will happen while it's recording. I woke up, what seemed to be maybe half an hour to an hour later, to a loud crying from a woman's voice. Me being sort of drowsy, I looked around to find the source of the noise, and there was a hole beside the recliner. And I know it sounds weird, but the owner didn't lay the floorboard down correctly and it eventually broke. So we put a temporary board over the broke part, but it left a sort of small little hole because it didn't exactly fit. And the crying was coming from beside me and in exactly that direction of the hole. I looked directly at it, realizing what was happening, jumped straight up and backed away in shock. The sound faded. I questioned if what I had just heard could have been my waking up from a lingering dream or something, but the only way to confirm it is to check the recording still going. I collected my phone from the table, paused the recording. Thoughts ran through my mind while getting my headphones to listen closely. I thought, 1, I'm going to hear nothing and realize that it was only a lingering dream, sit back down and laugh off my paranoia. 2, I will hear it and confirm a dreading truth. I went outside because I didn't feel exactly comfortable inside anymore. The temperature was around 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Yes, I know, it's probably not that cold to some, but in Texas it's normally like 100 to 110 degrees. Even the power went out a few times during the winter for a good part of Texas. They weren't prepared for snowy weather. But I sat on the porch, headphones on, fast-forwarding the video until I saw myself waking up and rewinded a few minutes before to see the truth. My heart raced with anxiety as I watched. In the video, I slept like normal, but then a noise came into the audio. It sounded like an eerie whine that became louder until the audio started cutting in and out like distortion. In the video, I woke up to the noise and looked around with sleepy eyes before looking at the floor and jumped up. I got chills at that, and I waited outside in the freezing cold, waiting for my parents to come home. I didn't want to go back inside. What I did next, I'll have to explain my reasoning too. You see, I've been through a lot. Near-death experiences plenty, poverty, an abusive father, and terminally ill mother. Yes, the parent that I have is my stepfather. And I wasn't really scared of too much back in those days, and I always thought that it was best to face my fear anyway. So I calmed down and I went back inside. I went to the living room where it happened and I closed my eyes. My brother passed away when I was a teenager, and sometimes when I'm going through hard times, I'll speak to him as if he's there. I said, "Brother, I don't know what to do. I'm hearing noises and it's weighing on my mind. I can't sleep or relax even in daylight, and I finally have proof that it's not inside my head. I love you and miss you, and I'm going to keep trying. Feeling more relaxed after saying that, I started to say a prayer. I'm a Christian, but I would be lying if I said that I followed my religion to every word. I'm not 100% on who or what God is or what religion is, so I pray, pouring my heart out, hoping God understands my ignorance and guides me from the trouble. I said in my prayer, please give me guidance. I understand people die and I'm not sure how death works. The crying I heard sounded like a woman in sorrow. It scared me at first. All I can do is pray, not for my own fear, but to show whatever it is guidance and love. Let it come out from the darkness into your light so that it ceases to suffer any longer. I took a deep breath after that and I opened my eyes. I no longer felt worried too. My heart felt at peace. I realized that sometimes fear is from ignorance of not knowing how it works. I hear a scary crying and think instantly of fear and ghost videos, scary movies, death, but I never think how it must feel to be stuck to a house or feel alone in some dark place. A family member or friend, neighbor to someone at one point. And writing this now, I really don't feel too stressed anymore. But I showed my parents the video and, of course, they felt fear and weren't sure how to feel about it. I made my final decision to end this story though, and I decided it's better to accept what happened and move forward in life, as there's too many aspects in life to fully comprehend everything. In any case, it really feels good to get this off my chest, and whether or not people believe this or not is totally up to them. But I'm just grateful that you stuck around to listen to me, and I can finally get some sleep now. Thanks again. I work for my city's water department. My everyday job consists of repairing leaks or doing new installations for businesses and homes. There are two parts to our water department that keep everything running: distribution, where I normally work, and production. Production deals with the chemical side of things. They chlorinate the water and do water sample checks. Production is also responsible for all of the upkeep of our water well sites and our water storage facilities, like the tall water towers that you might have seen in your city. And mowing grass is also one of those responsibilities. Both parts of our department are extremely understaffed right now, so we sometimes give the production guys a hand with the grass when they need it. A couple of weeks ago, it was my turn, and here is where the weirdness begins. So, my city is in central Louisiana with a population of about 45,000 people. We're surrounded by wooded area. No matter which way you travel into or out of town, you're going to see plenty of trees. As such, a lot of our well sites are located out in the boonies. Most of our city's trucks are four-wheel drive with mud grips because it's needed more often than not. In any case, I had 4 sites to cut that day. I headed out just before sunrise to the one at the end of the sort of long dirt road here, where if trouble strikes, your phone better be charged because no one is going to be able to hear you yell for help. Surprisingly, this isn't where my strange encounter took place either. But the sun was rising as I was approaching my first site, and on the road ahead of me stepped out a doe with 2 fawns. Excitedly, I hurried to snap some pictures. To my surprise though, the mama and her babies were not really afraid of the loud rumbling diesel that I was driving. The speckled fawns made their way across the path as the mum calmly watched me in the truck. Once the babies were safely across, she looked back the way that she had come and then joined the little ones in the tree line on the opposite side of the road. Now, I breezed through my mowing pretty quickly, loaded the equipment back onto the trailer, and texted my mum the pictures of the deer as I headed back into town. My mum messaged me back saying, "I've read that deer are an omen of good fortune. Looks like you're going to have a good day. Be safe, and I love you." And I did have a great day. I knocked out the 2 next sites without issue, and everything was going really smoothly. That is, until I reached the gate of the last place that I had to mow. McKeithen's site is the biggest one that we have that's closer to town. It's about the size of a football field. It's not in the middle of nowhere, but it's definitely on the outskirts of the city. There's normally plenty of traffic that travels the road there, so there's really no feeling of seclusion, even though it's surrounded by thick woods on 3 sides. I've cut this spot plenty of times though, but that day that day felt different. I pulled the truck through and hopped out to lock the gate behind me. Immediately, too, I felt like I needed to get back into the truck as quick as I could. I made my way down the driveway to park near the tower, like I have many times before. But after I parked and killed the truck, everything just felt really heavy and really silent, too. I don't know how long I sat until I was able to will myself to open the door and get out. Instantly, though, I felt eyes on me. The feeling was coming from the back right corner of the field outside of the fence, just in the tree line where the palmetto bushes grow. I calmed my nerves and reminded myself that I was surrounded by an 8-foot unclimbable fence with gate locked and everything. So yeah, if someone had a gun, then they could have shot me if they wanted to, I suppose, but they weren't going to actually get to me. If the barbed wire at the top of the fence didn't get them, a face full of weed eater string blades would. So I jumped on the zero turn and took off mowing, keeping an eye on the back corner during every pass. After about 2 hours, it took multiple runs due to the overgrowth. I had the entire front mowed and it was time to hit the back by the creepy corner. I was about to head that way too, but the mower blades just wouldn't engage. I had to take covers off, pull grass out of the belts, and rip grass out from under the deck. I had to grease the pulleys and do all sorts of troubleshooting. I finally got the blades going, but then the gas light came on. I didn't realize it until later, but I don't know, it felt like something was doing everything that it could to keep me from going to that part of the lot. I finally got everything up and running though and mowed the back as quickly as possible, doing everything that I could to keep my sight on the fence. I finally got done, loaded the mower. I still had to do a little bit of weed eating, but that was about it. But when the weed eater wouldn't start, I knew then that it was time to go. I hadn't had an issue with it all day, but that was the last hint that I needed to get out of there. So after pulling out of the gate and locking it behind me, I turned out into the highway to head home, but not before looking at the back corner one last time. So after pulling out of the gate and locking it behind me, I turned out onto the highway to head home, but not before looking back at the corner one last time. And that was when I finally saw it, the unmistakable shadow of a figure standing in the palmettos. It wasn't trying to hide or make itself unseen. It was there for sure. Being at a safe distance from it too, I stopped and watched. And it moved. It moved to the side as if it were bending to try and see me better at the road. Now, it had no distinguishing features. No hair, no clothes. Just a sort of person-shaped mass. I decided to get as far away from there as I could. The thought that I could have been so close to it for so long and never saw it really sent chills to my core. It obviously also confirmed to me the feelings that I had the whole time that it was there. I called my mum later that night and told her what had happened, and she told me that she did some more reading about seeing the deer and learned that they are a sign of protection. Some people believe that a deer means that a higher power is watching over you. I don't know about all that, but after my mum told me that, I couldn't help but think, what if I had not seen the deer that morning? Would I have even seen the shadow? Would it have been able to do something to me? Why did it choose to show itself to me right at the end there? Is there something about me, or is it tied to that part of the woods? 1,000 questions were running through my head, obviously, but my mum texted me even later that night. She was sitting out on her back steps on my little old hometown when she heard some rustling near her storage shed. She shone her phone light into the dark, and what stands there but a deer? Now, deer had never come into the backyard before like that. But that night, a large deer stood tall, staring back at my mum. She told me that she felt like it was there as if to say, "It's okay, he's safe, don't worry, we got him." But anyway, like I said, I don't know about any of that, but what I do know is that I saw something strange that day. I don't know what it was, I don't know what it was doing there, but it was definitely there, and it gave me the creeps. I've always been a fan of camping. Since I, currently 22 and male, was a child, the forest was pretty much like my second home. and so I decided my roommate, who happens to be one of my best friends, should definitely try it out too, and of course, he agreed. We chose a spot in a forest in the north of our country, close to my parents' native town. During the day, everything was normal, and we actually had quite a lot of fun. But what happened at night at around 3 a.m. though. We were woken up by, I don't know, what seemed to be the sound of people singing. Now, I swear that we hadn't brought much alcohol and we definitely don't do any drugs, so this was pretty much as weird as it gets. But it almost seemed like a religious chant or something. Of course, we immediately got out of the tent to see what was going on. There was nothing around us, as far as my friend's awful flashlight could show us anyway. The singing was further away, but not too far from what I could tell. We didn't actually have time to think whether we wanted to go and check it out or go back to sleep though, because a mere few moments later, something really quickly ran right beside me. It was literally like a wind breeze, but strong enough to actually knock my friend off his feet. I still have no idea what it was, but I swear to you here and now that when I looked in the direction it went, I swear that I saw a naked man over 2 meters tall. It was only a second though. Afterwards, it disappeared. I went to check on my friend and he was unconscious. Of course, I immediately panicked and ran for a place with at least one bar on my phone so that I could call for help. I found a spot and I began dialing, and I'm quite certain I saw a hooded person stalking me 10 meters away, but he also disappeared quickly. I assumed this one was because of adrenaline rushing through my veins and the darkness surrounding everything. I probably just saw something, but I rushed back to my friend and stood there until the authorities arrived. As I'm telling you this, it's been over 2 weeks since then. My friend went into a coma, but the doctors are optimistic. And like I said, I still have no idea what the heck that was. I don't know whether the hooded man was real or a figment of my imagination, but the tall naked guy, he was definitely real. I'm sure of that. As you can imagine though, I don't know what to make of any of this. If you have any idea of what this could have been, then I would love to hear it. During my 8th grade and high school years, I was an extremely depressed kid. My mum was an abusive alcoholic, and because of that, there was a lot of negative energy that not only filled the house we were renting, but seemed to sort of hover around me. I was stupid at the time, even more so than I am now, and liked to give this negative energy a lot of attention. While I had a lot of minor experiences like hearing voices, lucid nightmares, scratches on my body, etc., one experience really sticks out to me in my memory. You see, I was spending the night at my grandparents' house. I wish that I could remember the reason, but it's hard for me to recall a lot of the memories in that time period due to my trauma. In any case, I was raised for a good portion of my life at my grandparents' house, so I was spending the night in my old room when I was very suddenly and very aggressively shaken awake. I sat there for a minute, but I quickly brushed it off as me having one of those nightmares where you sort of feel like you're falling or something, but as I got comfortable and tried to go back to sleep, I heard a snapping. No rhythm, just very aggressive snapping all around the bed that I was lying in. At this point in my life, I was so desensitized to having weird things happen to me, I just sort of sighed angrily and went back to sleep. I don't know how much time had passed, but for a second time I was shaken awake. This time, the bed was shaking a little too, so I knew that it wasn't one of those falling nightmares. And I remember sitting up at this time out of annoyance and just sort of looking around. I had a nightlight in the room because I'm kind of scared of the dark after certain experiences that I might share another time, but I could see everything fairly well. The snapping started again and it came from all around my bed once more. Once again, I grumbled some obscenities and angrily went back to sleep. Finally, though, for a third time I was shaken awake, but this time I was still being shaken after I had woken up for a few extra seconds. I sat up again and This time the snapping noises were louder and somehow felt even closer to me, much more all over the place too. I was really quite annoyed at this point, and as I sort of glare around my room, I suddenly see something whiz past the front of my bed and smack the tall metal lamp on the left side of my room. For whatever reason, this sent me over the edge, and I remember saying some pretty choice words to whatever was waking me up and threatening them before throwing myself back onto the pillow, turning on my side, and yanking the blanket over my head to sleep. And after that, I wasn't awoken again. The following morning, I looked around the lamp to see what could have been thrown, but I couldn't find anything. It sounded like metal hitting, so I assumed that it was a coin, but I just couldn't find anything. I've also had some other experiences in my grandparents' house and my own, so let me know if you guys would like to hear about those. But finally, to talk about how this could be debunked, I guess, I have been diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and there's a chance that it was all hallucinations. I fully grant that. I also have had some extreme nightmares around this time in which I could feel things. However, in these nightmares, I was always lucid. I'm not going to deny that this totally could have been made up in my head and that it could have just been my own mental illness freaking out and throwing random stuff at me, but certain things just really don't match up for that. Like, if it were a hallucination, why and how was I being shaken by an outside source? Me dreaming could make a lot more sense, but there's two things that don't add up there as well. I was relentlessly tortured in my dreams, a physical torture, so why wasn't this dream like all the other ones? Secondly, I was only ever physically tortured once I realized I was in a dream, not right off the bat, and I felt a lot more, in touch than whenever I was dreaming. Also, the fact that I was sort of shaken for those few seconds after I had woken up, and I remember being physically shaken. I don't know. Maybe it was just my body reacting or something like that, but it definitely felt like someone was shaking me. Anyways, I'd love to hear your guys' feedback and if you've had any similar experiences or have any idea as to what the heck could have gone through that night. Thanks for letting me share, and I know not everyone's going to believe this, but thanks for hearing me out anyway. When I was 15 or so, me and my group of friends all slept over at the leader of our friend's group's house. This dude lived in the most absolutely rural area of our rural town, basically in the middle of the woods, a house just absolutely surrounded by thick walls of trees. In the evening, we decided to go out and start a bonfire deep in the woods, so we packed up, got all of our materials, and went straight out into the woods. On the way to the spot that we'd be making our campfire at, he told us about how messed up and creepy his woods are, and the numerous things that he's seen. White, skinny figures peeking around his shed, staring at him and running off when he looked at it, screaming in whispers from the woods, figures watching him, all that stuff. It definitely set the mood pretty well. By around 7 at night, we had the campfire set up, and it was pitch black outside, as it was the middle of winter in New Hampshire. I can still remember just how creepy the whole vibe was that night too. You could not see a single thing besides the ring of light coming out from the fire. Everything else was just a black wall of nothingness. And the sound of the forest was so quiet that it was almost deafeningly loud if we didn't talk. We ended up needing more firewood or whatever that we were using for the campfire, along with some other things, so the leader takes me with him to go get it. Without a flashlight or any light source, me and him walk the 1.5 long trail back to his house in complete and utter darkness. And it was all good. We were talking, joking with each other, having a good time just hanging out when the first noises started. He immediately made me stop talking too. To my left and my right was a bunch of different sounds. Screaming, laughing, talking and whispering, shouting, people saying inaudible words. It sounded like there was maybe 20 people around us. The natural light vision had set in a decent amount, and I looked over at my friend, who had his head down and didn't say a single word. Known for being a complete goofball and a wild, funny dude, I had never seen him look so shaken and serious in my life. He had this look to him that still kind of haunts me to this day, as we knew him and he portrayed himself as this fearless leader type of our group, and seeing him so shaken up and afraid was really unsettling. I started to say something along the lines of, "What the heck is that?" before he cut me off and told me to be quiet, face forward, and to not pay attention to any of the sounds. I did what he said, and the next 3 or so minutes was uncomfortable and terrifying. I remember feeling sick to my stomach, in fact. By the time that we reached his house, the sounds had sort of dissipated and stopped. We both grabbed what we needed to grab in silence, and that's when I could really listen to the sheer quietness of that night. No birds, no sticks falling, no sound, absurdly silent. We walked back to the campsite, and nothing else occurred that night, but it is still the most unsettling and bizarre experience that I have almost no explanation of. This could be a paranormal experience, although I'm still not ready to say that I know for sure. Whatever it was, though, it definitely had me terrified.